funding. Lastly, as everyone prepares to head off for a well-earned break, I just want to wish the Assembly, all your hard-working staff and everyone a joyful Christmas and a Happy New Year.
And the same to you, Mr. Mayor.
Chair, I've been asked for one oral update. You mentioned two.
Two, yes, I have.
The one I've got is on the Northern Line extension.
You should have one on the taxi and private hire trade. Have you not received that?
I don't, Chair. But I know this. I'm happy to deal with the question in
Yes. Well, you were simply asked for an update on your press release published yesterday on air quality initiatives, I think, and the taxi trade.
Sure, I can deal with that, Chair.
I think you sort of mentioned it.
I can do that, Chair. Thank you, Chair. Delivery of the, I'll first deal with the first oral update from Sloan Pigeon that I was cited of. Delivery of the Northern Line extension is progressing well. Tunnelling of the whole route has been completed and the track has been laid from Nine Elms to Battersea in both tunnels. The two stations are taking shape and the two junctions that connect with the existing Northern Line at Kennington have also been completed. In terms of the opening date, and as was reported in the public session of last week's meeting of the TfL's Programme and Investment Committee, the end of December 2020 target is under review. This has been driven by the need to adapt the construction programme as the designs for both Battersea Power Station's oversight development and the tube station underneath it have evolved. There are very significant interdependencies between these two projects. They need to be kept in close alignment with the line ready for when new commercial tenants and residents are moving in. TfL and the developer have been working closely together to ensure that the interfaces are well managed. There is also other considerations related to the planned closure of the bank branch of the Northern Line that is timetabled for September 2021. This is part of the bank station upgrade and necessitates a full closure of that branch. As well as making the operation of the line more complicated, the temporary closure of the bank branch will have a significant impact on the overall capacity of the Northern Line. All services will run on the Charing Cross branch and there is clearly an imperative to do all that we can to maintain frequencies at stations which are already very busy. This is not an ideal operational context within which to introduce services onto the extension. For all those reasons, TfL is reviewing the timetable for the extension. This process is expected to complete in the new year. With regard to costs of the project, it is fully budgeted for in the TfL's business plan and cost projections are broadly in line with the original budget set in 2014. As with any major project, TfL has reviewed its forecasts over time and in January 2016, the forecast cost had risen to £1.26 billion. Due to commercial sensitivity, this could not be made public at that time. Earlier this month, it was reported to TfL's Programme and Investment Committee that the most likely project forecast is £1.1 billion. So TfL has achieved some significant savings against the January 2016 cost projection. It is important to point out that any delays with the opening of the Northern Line extension are not having the same cost implications as seen for Crossrail. Later delivery of the Northern Line extension saves both capital and operating expenditure. There is also limited value in running a new tube line before the development it is there to serve will be ready. Chair, you also asked about an oral update in relation to the announcement made yesterday. Urgent action needs to be taken on congestion and air quality in London. Air pollution is a national health crisis that is stunting the lung development of our children and leading to thousands of premature deaths. In April 2019, the ultra-low emission zone will be introduced in central London in the same area as the congestion charge zone and will apply 24 hours a day. At the same time, a new cleaner vehicle discount will apply to the congestion charge and the PHV exemption will be removed. These changes will not affect black cabs, but more must be done to make these vehicles cleaner and reduce their current environmental impact. Taxis contribute over 20% of NOx, nitrogen dioxide and nitrogen oxide, road transport emissions in central London, and from 2020 will be the largest source of road transport NOx in central London. The previous mayor committed to achieving 9,000 zero-emission capable taxis by 2020. This was an extremely challenging target, and despite the grants available to taxi drivers, we need to do more to meet this ambition. The proposals could reduce NOx emissions from taxis around 45% in 2022 and 66% in 2025, transforming London as air.
Thank you very much. Questions on the update? Assembly Member Pigeon.
Thank you. Mr Mayor, when did you first know about the delayed opening to the Northern Line extension? And I understand the capital, which sounds more reassuring than at first glance, but is there potential lost fare revenue, but also payments for any claims from the contractors or developers? Because it's probably going to be about a year's delay from what you're saying.
I think discussions are taking place between the developers and TfL. The main issues are there's no need for a station to open if the commercial development and the resident development isn't ready for the new station. That's the first big issue. Second, there has been a change in design in the stations, both surface and as an impact subsurface. There are conversations about the additional cost there may be for there. And the third issue is we now know that in 2021, the bank branch of Northern Line's going to be closed for tunnelling work to do the bank station upgrade. So as part of the conversations with the developer, I think TfL will also use the opportunity to, rather than opening a station and that leading to more traffic having to go via Charing Cross, to try and chime the two. But that's the review taking place, and as soon as a resolution has been reached, of course, that will be made public.
My question is, when did you first know about this, and what is the likely loss in fare revenue because you're delaying it?
I think the conversations between TfL and the developer have been going on for some time in relation to the station changes that the developer has. The actual original orders went in 2014, and it's not unusual for things to change. As far as fares income being lost is concerned, my understanding is TfL aren't concerned about a loss of fares income from a station that's not going to open when originally planned. It's going to open a bit later. For the simple reason, it's very different to Crossrail, which had a huge in stage 5 new passengers coming to TfL. I think the numbers of passengers we're talking about, because they're using other TfL services, may not be the same in relation to impact, because these are people.
Okay, but do you know whether there is a fare revenue impact? I
can make sure when we publish the outcome of the review, we also give the figure whether there is a loss, and if we know what the loss is. I don't think there will be a loss though, because I think it'll be people moving from one TfL service to the other.
And when did you first know? Obviously, TfL have been in discussions. When were you first made aware that this was potentially a problem?
I mean, I think in the background, I've known about the discussions between TfL and the developer. I think there's also been some litigation in relation to costs, and it was discussed at a subcommittee last week. I've known for some time about discussions between TfL and the developer. I've also known about the blockade, it's called a blockade in the bank branch. And I think it makes sense for TfL to work with the developer to come up with a new date.
Okay, perhaps get some more detail in writing on some of the specifics there. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any more on the update? Assembly Member Curtin.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, Mr. Mayor.
Good morning.
Now, I just want to ask you about your plans for the taxi trade, which were announced yesterday. And you said a couple of times in your update that taxi drivers need to do more to help with improving London's air quality. But do you accept that they are doing everything that they can? Because the new zero-emission capable taxis are being bought up as quickly as they roll off the production line up in Coventry.
Oh, listen, black taxi drivers are doing a huge amount. And anything more we can do to help them, we are doing. And one of the things you'll also have spotted from yesterday's announcement was a bigger grant, some would call it a subsidy, to black taxi drivers to make the transition from the current polluting diesel vehicles to the cleaner form of black taxis.
I'm not sure whether I would agree with you there, Mr. Mayor, because you had this delicensing scheme, and you've always said up to now that there'll be £42 million in that delicensing scheme. But yesterday, in the announcement, you've reduced the amount to £18 million, about 60%. Why have you reduced the amount in the delicensing scheme available to taxis to help them, just at the time when they need extra money to transfer to zero-emission capable taxis?
Well, we know that the transfers aren't happening as fast as they could and should. And so if it is the case that there's a huge transfer, then we'd look at if we can increase the amount that we're given to black taxi drivers. At the moment, there isn't a massive transfer. So by increasing the amount of lump sum given to an individual driver, maybe that will accelerate the progress made.
Well, you've said you're going to increase the maximum amount from 5,000 to 10,000, but only for 250 taxi drivers. You said you want 9,000 taxi drivers to go over to zero-emission capable by 2020. The two things don't make sense. They don't tie up. Don't you need to rethink your plans on this?
Well, I think the 250 is to stimulate interest, to try and get people being competitive and trying to have almost like a race to get black taxi drivers interested in the transfer. The problem at the moment is there aren't enough transferring over. So the ambitious target that the previous mayor had, which I accept, of £9,000 is not going to be met. And this is one of the ways we're trying to provide a carrot to those who want to get ahead of the game to transfer over. You get, if you're one of the first 250, you get the additional lump sum, you can transfer over. And so the idea is for there to be a race, and clearly if there are hundreds, more than 250, who apply in the next few days, we'll look at whether we can increase the offer.
Sorry, Mr. Mayor, I don't think it was the previous mayor that suggested 9,000 taxi drivers should go ZEC. It was you. It came in on your watch, not the previous mayor. And
it was the previous mayor, but
you want 9,000 to transfer. So just giving 10,000 to 250, yes, they'll take that up. But what about the other 8,750? And as I've said, taxi drivers are buying these zero-emission capable taxis as quickly as they roll off the production line. And so they do need help, I mean, to buy these new taxis when they come over. It's the wrong thing to reduce the amount of money. And where has the other £24 million gone out of this delicensing fund? Where's it gone?
Well, firstly, it's really important to make sure we deal with facts. It was the previous mayor who's set the target of 9,000, which I accept, and I'm glad you accept that you were wrong. In relation to the monies for helping black taxis, we'll continue to support black taxis. We've got a raft of measures to help them. We've done over the last 2 years. The business plan for TfL has been published. You'll see the business plan, and the relevant committees looking into this, and I'll be speaking to the plenary in January as well, so you'll see how the business plan for the TfL works out there. We're keen to support black taxis making the transition. We support black taxis. That's why over the last 2 years I've introduced a number of measures, from investing in an increase in the number of taxi ranks to introducing easier methods for customers to pay, which leads to more passengers using black taxis, the card and contactless card payments, from having additional bus lanes being able to use by black taxis, not just our roads, but also persuading councils to do the same.
Could
also
I stop
funding,
you there, Mr. Mayor, because that doesn't relate
I was listing the help I'm
directly to
giving
the
to black
question.
taxis.
That doesn't relate to your press release yesterday. That we've covered this many times, and I've accepted some of the things you have done. But it seems now all the good things there are being negated by these terrible things for the taxi trade. And then speaking to representatives of the taxi trade yesterday after you made your announcement, merely by the fact that you've made your announcement, and another thing you said was that the license period for a taxi is going to be reduced from 15 years to 12 years. So that means there'll be 4,500 taxis, 20% of the taxi fleet will be not able to use the roads. You're going to put 20% of taxi drivers out of a job just like that. And there's nothing for them to help them. And the price of an older taxi, which is now over 12 years old, has dropped like a stone, almost overnight, just simply by you making the announcement. Why didn't you think of this? Why didn't you think of the consequences to taxi drivers and the taxi trade? And don't you actually think that on this you're wrong, and you need to rethink your ideas and your answers? You need to protect the taxi drivers to make sure that their trade can continue.
I think even you would have to accept that there are thousands of premature deaths in our city because of poor quality air. I think even you would have to accept that a number of adults have health issues caused directly by the poor quality air. I think even you would have to accept science, which shows that taxis contribute over 20% of the NOx road transport emissions in central London, and from 2020 will be the largest source of road transport NOx in central London. Now look, I can ignore the science, and ignore the experts like some would like us to do. But I look at the experts and look at the science, and actually we've got to address the fact that some of our taxis are the biggest polluters when it comes to poor quality air in our cities.
Well, Mr. Mayor, I mean, I accept we need good quality air, but as I put to you a couple of times, taxi drivers are buying the zero-emission capable taxis as quickly as they roll off the production line. There simply aren't those taxis available for them. So it's not the right thing to do to say to drivers, you can't drive anymore, when there are not these zero-emission capable taxis for them to drive. I mean, I'm out of time here, but I really do think that you need to reconsider, and you need to engage the taxi trade and talk to them. You should have spoken to them before this announcement came out. Okay. Thank you, Chair. I'm out of time.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you very much. Before we go on to the formal question, I'd like to...
was that a question, Chair? Sorry.
No, he's finished.
Oh, sure.
I'd like to welcome pupils from South Park Primary School in Ilford. Really called South Park? There we are.
They're not in Chair, they are.
Okay. Anyway, the first formal question is in the name of Assembly Member Curtin, and I think that is he out of time? You can go for it if you want.
I still have group time, so I might take another minute of this, because it is on a different issue, yes.
All right,
Okay.
all right. So the next question, therefore, is from Assembly Member Duval on the funding settlement.
No, sorry.
Did he say yes?
We will do the question. We will to rejig our time. Yes, I would like to ask the question.
More on taxes.
Yes, please.
Okay. Will you please answer the table question from Assembly Member Curtin?
Thank you, Chair. London's taxis provide an accessible, reliable and trusted service to Londoners. I've been clear that our world-famous black taxis have a vital role to play in the future of our city, and I'm determined that we do all that we reasonably can to support the trade's hard-working drivers. I've tasked Transport for London with transforming London's roads in line with our Healthy Streets approach to encourage Londoners to walk, cycle and use public transport while reducing road danger for vulnerable road users. Each proposal must carefully consider the delivery of this approach, while balancing the needs of the taxi trade and other valued stakeholders. Following the closure of Tooley Street to eastbound traffic for 2 years during Network Rail works to London Bridge Station, TfL looked at how it could continue to improve the street for the thousands of pedestrians travelling to and from the station. TfL has also considered how cyclists connect to Cycle Superhighway 4 further along Tooley Street. A proposal was developed that restricted all eastbound motorised traffic, including taxis, between Duke Street Hill and Bermondsey Street, to help reduce road danger and improve the local environment along this busy pedestrian corridor. In developing the proposals, TfL considered the alternative eastbound taxi routes to the station via the taxi ranks on St Thomas Street and London Bridge Street. TfL is currently consulting on the proposed changes at Tooley Street, and the deadline for comments is the 8th of January 2019. TfL undertakes public consultations to ensure that affected road users and interested parties will have an opportunity to give their views. These views are thoroughly assessed and taken into account before a decision is made and amendments may be made to scheme proposals. We encourage taxi drivers and all other interested parties to respond to these consultations to ensure their views are captured.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. You've said many times that taxis are a vital and integrated part of London's transport system. Cyclists and buses will continue to be allowed to use Tooley Street and Duke Hill Street in an eastbound direction. Do you think it's right that taxis should also be able to use Tooley Street in the same direction and use the bus lanes?
Well, that's why we're having a consultation, Chair.
Okay.
And
if there's an overwhelming response in the consultation that says it is in favour of taxi drivers being able to continue to use Tooley Street in both directions, will you take notice of the answers and allow taxi drivers to continue to use Tooley Street?
Well, TfL always look at the responses, both qualitative and quantitative, and I'm sure TfL will look at the responses to the consultation which ends on January the 9th.
Okay, thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thank you very much. Now Assembly Member Duval on the funding settlement.
Thank you, Chair. The local government settlement was as we'd expected. Despite London having a 100% business rates pilot this year, we're only granted a 75% pilot for 2019-20. We need to be clear about the scale of the funding crisis councils are facing. Councils up and down the country still face an overall funding gap of £3.2 million in 2019-20. Even the Conservative chair of the Local Government Association has said that, and I quote, many councils will be forced to take tough decisions about which services have to be scaled back or stopped altogether to plug funding gaps. Last week's settlement confirmed the funding figures we had forecast for the GLA and the London Fire Brigade. The non-police referendum threshold was confirmed at 2.99%, and London's business rates pilot will be 75% for 19-20. But Londoners will be furious at the government's police settlement. The additional funding represents a tiny fraction of the huge government cuts to the Met Police since 2010, and will mean the number of police officers in London will continue to fall over the years ahead. The government still gives us £159 million a year less to meet the extra costs of police in the capital than they themselves say were due. To add to this, we have no certainty about funding for the police, fire brigade, City Hall or TfL from April 2020. This makes it incredibly hard to plan ahead. We can't hire police officers that we won't be able to afford in a year's time. We've had months, Chair, of warm words from the Home Secretary about the desperate need for more government funding in order to tackle violent crime, but the government has fundamentally failed to back that up with real money. Harsh reality is that the government is yet again shunting the cost of policing onto London council taxpayers, which is deeply regressive, and it's the poorest, the hardest. Let's be clear that this announcement from the government will not fill the massive financial black hole they've created. The failure to reverse the damaging cuts last week means that we now face the very real prospect of officer numbers falling even further. I'm hugely concerned about how we continue to keep Londoners safe with so few officers, an increased terror threat and a rising population.
And thank you very much, Mr. Mayor, for that answer. Let's go back. In terms of police funding, even the government's funding settlement doesn't even cover the shortfall in the grant it receives to pay for things associated being with the capital and international city. And we've done an exercise in the past, but will you continue to highlight that a major proportion of our funding on a specific grant we're subsidising because we want to keep people safe? But it's not our fault that we're London, it's not our fault we're the capital city, and it's not our fault that we're a main target for those who want to cause harm and distress to others and to get some publicity out of it. Can you make sure that we do a proper campaign, that we separate out the funding? I'm not asking you to withdraw the funding from counter-terrorism, but we're subsidising it. And government needs to know that, and we need our fair share of police funding back here. So really, what's your thinking about some of these grant issues, the international, the capital fund for protests and issues of that, but also about counter-terrorism funding?
I mean, Chair, the Assembly Member who's got huge experience in this area reminds us that actually the government themselves recognise that as a national and international capital city, we need additional resources. And there's a grant formula the Home Office have to give London additional resources. According to their own calculations, we should receive, roughly speaking, £350 million a year on top of the funding we receive via core funding from the government. The government also accept that we receive, roughly speaking, only half of that. So we're half short. The government gave us a bit of additional money as a national and international capital city, about £17 million, but there's still a shortfall of £155 million. And you're right. So protests, things like New Year's Eve fireworks, things like tourists, things like state visits, things like having 6 Premier League football clubs, and on, have additional costs on our policing. None of us wants extractions from wards and boroughs to keep our city safe. But we're also, as you reminded us, a target for terrorists. Terrorists deliberately target capital cities. And the government's formula recognises this in relation to how much we should receive. We're not receiving that. And it's really important we as an Assembly, but also as the Mayor, lobby for this. And some colleagues may, for political reasons, not like the fact that I'm an advocate for more resources for our city and will complain that I'm whinging or complaining. I don't apologise or resile for being an advocate for our city.
Thank you very much. You rightly highlighted that austerity hasn't ended for London local government and our colleagues providing real services to people of London across the sea. Do you not think, following on, and you may not have a view on this, but considering that in the Metropolitan Police we organised the basic command units to recognise we couldn't do it on a borough basis, the NHS is going for a reorganisation which I think should be more transparent, but they're moving the CCGs to merge into the strategic units, so still keep a borough focus, but they're going to be bigger units and delivery services. Do you think it's time, it will take a long time and lots of discussion and lots of research, that in terms of London local government, we may just, because of government cuts, run out of the 1964 reforms, and we need to reform London local government to deliver services within the reduced funding that government has given it to do?
I mean, I'm always nervous to change fundamentally structures because they can be quite disruptive. The good news, though, is because of the necessity, there is closer collaboration than I suspect there's ever been, actually. I'll give you one example in relation to the public health approach around violent crime. Actually, when you see the people around the table, Len, from councils, central government, probation, MOJ, NHS, civic society, charities, City Hall, MOPAC, the police, that collaboration has happened because we realise working together is more effective, but also our budgets aren't in silos. And so what I'm hoping to do is leverage in some of the funding for the VRU going forward. But let me give you another example. When you speak to police officers, they will tell you the numbers of people they deal with mental health issues. The police used to be the port of last resort, now they're the port of first call. If the NHS was properly funded, I would argue, and there's more joined upness, the police wouldn't be having to pick up the pieces. And so there are consequences for cuts in public resources, but lack of working together. And so you're right. I think because of the cuts that have been made, we've got to work closer together. I'm not sure if structural change will be needed for us to do that, but more devolution will help.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. The next question is the name of Assembly Member Russell. It relates to cycle lanes.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you. I've prioritised cycle funding in 3 successive TfL business plans. This will help us increase protected space for cycling. Transport for London is currently conducting a comprehensive London-wide audit of cycling infrastructure, including details of protected cycle lanes on London streets. This database, which will be launched in 2019, will provide an accurate and up-to-date figure for the total length of protected cycle lanes in London, including those not on cycle superhighway routes. Working with boroughs, we've already delivered 44 kilometres of additional protected space, almost doubling what I inherited just 2.5 years ago. That's 44 kilometres in 2.5 years, not 8 years, like the previous mayor. By 2020, we hope to have another 56 kilometres more, which will be either completed or under construction. The protected space we've already built includes completing the second phases of the east-west and north-south cycle superhighways, meaning people can now cycle away from traffic between Elephant and Castle and King's Cross and Tower Hill, Parliament Square, Lancaster Gate 5, Buckingham Palace. It includes new routes we've delivered in partnership with boroughs, such as green lanes in Enfield and Lee Bridge Road in Waltham Forest, and it includes protected space created through junction overhauls, such as Westminster Bridge South and around the former Stratford Gyratory. Earlier this week, we launched the Cycling Action Plan in Enfield, one of our mini Holland boroughs that is doing fantastic work to enable more people to cycle by creating protected space for cycling on its streets. The plan sets out the actions that TfL and boroughs are taking together with other partners to make cycling easier and more appealing for everyone. The centrepiece of the new Cycle Action Plan is a delivery plan for a comprehensive, high-quality cycle network right across the city that we will work with London boroughs to build, and a pipeline of new routes stretching into the future. This includes new protected routes between Brentford and Olympia, Cycle Superhighway 9, Greenwich and Tower Bridge, and Cycle Superhighway 4, with construction to start next summer. It also includes new protected routes between Tottenham Hale and Camden, and Hackney and the Isle of Dogs, which, subject to consultation, will start construction next year also. The plan also includes funding for a range of measures to break down the barriers to cycling that some communities in London still face.
Thank you, Mr Mayor, and I've read your cycling action plan cover to cover. Really pleased to see that it is a people-focused plan for enabling everyday cycling, and also the emphasis on working with the boroughs. That's a useful step forward. I was also really pleased to see that you're rolling out the zebra crossings at bus stop bypasses. It was something I asked you to trial, and I'm really glad to see it in there. And would you please give my congratulations to Will Norman, your Cycling and Walking Commissioner. Now, my question was, so I take it from your answer that you are going to meet your pledge to triple. Can I just check, did I hear that that includes the segregated tracks that were part of the Enfield Mini Holland scheme?
They'll include all the segregated cycle routes, so, whether it's superhighway, quietways, Central London Grid, Mini Hollands or other schemes.
Yep. So it is physically protected, but it does include some of the stuff that came out of the Mini Holland programme.
Yeah, so can I...
Do you want to get back to me on that?
No, I can tell you the definition. Is that what you're after?
I'm going to move on to talk about your quality criteria, so I'll do that.
Just to reassure the Assembly Chair, there is a definition of what protected space is, and so that should reassure you, and I'll write you.
Okay, thank you very much. So I get that you're rebranding, you're bringing all your cycle provision in under one scheme. So just looking at the quality criteria for these routes, you've got 6 quality criteria in focus box 6, and they say that you should only mix people cycling with motorised traffic where there are fewer than 500 vehicles an hour at peak. Now, this busts the DFT's national guidance and what the London Cycling Campaign want. They both say the limit should be around 200 vehicles an hour unless you're providing physical protection so children and people who are new to cycling are safe. So I'm just wondering why this higher volume has been chosen And will you bring it in line with the DFT guidance before the final quality criteria are published? So you're saying 500 vehicles an hour is okay without physical protection. The DFT suggests that it's 200 vehicles an hour and then you need physical protection.
Chair, can I suggest if it helps, because the quality criteria needs to be quality criteria for the Walking and Cycling Commissioner to meet with Caroline, who's to discuss these issues. What I would want to do is have a quality criteria that doesn't satisfy the concerns that cyclists like you and others have. So would that be okay? Then
that would be great. Very much appreciate meeting with him. And then it says in the plan that your quality criteria and the updated cycle design standards are going to be published next year. Can you give me a month?
I can't give you a month. No, I can't even do that, Chair.
Should we take it as December 2019?
I will this afternoon let you know.
If you could, because if it's as late as December next year, you've only got a few months left to deliver.
And I do take the spirit within your suggestion. So can I go back to you this afternoon?
Okay, and finally, really glad to see CS9 is still there in your thing, but it looks like it's been consulted on again. It's already been consulted on once. Will you guarantee we can see spades in the ground in 2019, or do you think it might be held up again?
Well, can I just say, Chair, this is a good example of the Council trying their best to help us. So Hampstead and Fulham and Hounslow are working with us. Will Norman spent a lot of time there. There's had to be rerouting to address some of the concerns raised previously. Both boroughs are keen to explore how to improve cycling, make it easy for pedestrians and cyclists. We want to go as soon as we can. We've got to make sure we take boroughs with us. You'll know, Chair, as a former councillor, the importance of doing so with Chiswick. And so we hope to take the borough with us. If we can, we're going to get shovels in ground next year.
That's really reassuring. You're working well with the boroughs on that. It is so important. I was cycling there recently with someone who's new to cycling, and the lack of protected space. She was really frightened, and you know it is really needed. But I'm out of time, so thank you.
Understood.
Thank you for that. Just for clarification, did I hear you say that there will be rerouting of CS9?
There's potential rerouting of CS9, which is what the discussions with the council are about.
Okay, thank you very much. Assembly Member Eshalomi.
Just to follow up on that, and again, very much welcome your cycle initiatives. And one of my New Year's resolution is to actually take up cycling, so watch this space. But does the Mayor agree with my Assembly colleague, Assembly Member Bailey, in terms of cyclists on the embankment on CS3 feeling pinned up against the river? Essentially, we need to get more people out cycling. So what would the Mayor say to that?
Well, I mean, I used to work in the House of Commons, as you know. I've never felt pinned up against the river. But also I think we've got to be quite careful about those who want to reroute a cycle superhighway that works so well. And it just begs a number of questions. Because anybody who's used that cycle superhighway knows it's a direct route. And it demonstrates that for some people, cyclists should be second, third, fourth, or fifth, or sixth consideration. No. And I think we should be quite concerned about ideas that cycle superhighway would be rerouted. That's one of the reroutes that he's told us about. God knows what his plans would be if, heaven forbid, he was become the mayor of this great city. But I think cyclists should be wary of somebody talking publicly about rerouting cycle superhighways or using language like pinned up against the river.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Okay. Thank you very much. Next question is in the name of Assembly Member O'Connell and relates to county lines.
Thank you, Chair. County line operations exploits children and vulnerable people into transporting or selling drugs in other parts of the country. We're working to end this terrible exploitation and the crime and violence which is often associated. Last week I visited the National Crime Agency, which is taking the lead nationally on tackling this activity. They estimate that there are at least 720 county lines across the country. However, the true number is likely to be even higher. Around a third of county lines originate from London, so we're taking a lead role in tackling this issue, but it's a national problem and a national challenge. The funding we're providing from London through the London Crime Prevention Fund has supported the launch of the first pan-London county lines response service. This is an investment of £3 million over 3 years. The response and rescue service, which started in July 2018, will support London's young people caught up in the county lines activity by providing 24 hours, 7 days a week support. 145 referrals have been received to date, and while it's too early to see the results, I've been encouraged by what we've seen so far. The Met has already taken action to tackle county lines, and there have been more than 50 convictions this year for dealers running lines out of London. One recent operation against a group controlling 2 lines lasted for over 12 months and involved several other enforcement agencies. This resulted in 5 convictions. Each line was thought to be making between £5,000 and £10,000 a week, and over £15,000 worth of harmful drugs were recovered, along with £75,000 worth of cash, jewellery and expensive clothing. But to build on the success, we simply need more funding and resources from the government. We've had months of warm words from the Home Secretary about the desperate need for more funding for the police, but they failed in the police settlement last week with giving us that additional funding. Tackling county lines, like the response to violent crime in general, must be a national problem with national solutions, including national resources.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, for your response. And I'm glad you highlight the importance of this issue. Organised crime has been around in this country for as long as crime has been around. But however, the county line issue has got to a critical level, and particularly around the point you made around the exploitation of children and other vulnerable people. But I think the picture that you're painting is not quite as, it's a bit more bleak than that, because I've got a quote from Lynn Owens is in around the fact that the Met and others can do more. And I think you underscored the number of county lines coming out of London, and we don't know the exact figures, which is your point, but it's more like half the county lines in the UK. I welcome the extra investment you mentioned, Mr. Mayor, but would you recognise that we've got to a stage where, frankly, London is exporting crime around the country at a level that is unacceptable?
I agree with what you said. I mean, just to colleagues that aren't police experts like you are, Lynn Owens, the NCA have also formally directed chief constables in this area. So the Director General issued a directive tasking police forces to do more around county lines. It's the first time the NCA have given a directed tasking to police forces, which demonstrates the seriousness of this. And we as capital city have a huge role to play, not just as exporters, we are the biggest force as well.
I was speaking to a chief constable from a West Country constabulary, and the exploitation of violence, drug dealing and exploitation, as I say, is the number one issue in some of those boroughs. And I think this is something where I would like you to exert more pressure on the Met. We know that SC07 is working at 2/3, according to Cressida Dick, diverting resources elsewhere in response to other London issues. But I think we need to look at it more strategically, because this is an issue that affects Londoners, clearly, but ultimately there is a national responsibility that you and the Met have, Mr. Mayor.
I mean, just to reassure Chair of the Assembly, the Met Police are the lead force when it comes to county lines across the country. And I'd be very happy to arrange for a presentation to the committee PCC to talk about some of the work we're doing. But there is a link, the Assembly members alluded to this, there is a link between organised crime, drugs, gangs, and the increase in violent crime. So actually, we're not talking, I don't think the Met Police are taking resources away from county lines to fight other pressing issues. They're all linked. But also, you're right to remind us in your earlier question about the safeguarding role. These are young people, vulnerable people, who are being groomed to be mules and couriers and stuff. And often, you've got young children from London, in Edinburgh, or other parts of our country. So you're right, there is a responsibility to do more policing, but also other parts of the social services, child welfare, education, others as well. So I can assure you, Assembly Member, that the Commission takes it very, very seriously. But I'm very happy, Chair, for the relevant officer who leads for the country, who's a Met officer, to do a presentation to the PCC, if that would help.
I know PCC will continue to take an interest, Chair. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you very much. The next 2 questions on TfL finances and London suburbs have been withdrawn. So we now go on to 5312 from Assembly Member Dismore on Brexit.
Thank you, Chair. The vote on the 11th of December was to be one of the biggest and most important parliamentary votes in at least a generation. Having sent her ministers out over the weekend to talk up the prospect of that vote, the Prime Minister waited until the very last minute to cancel it in a manner that MPs of all parties have rightly condemned. The last 2 years of chaotic negotiations have resulted in a bogus choice between the Prime Minister's bad deal or no deal. Neither option is acceptable to Parliament, and both are a million miles from what was promised during the referendum campaign. People did not vote for fewer jobs or reduced growth and less investment, an outcome that most experts agree this Brexit deal would deliver. Even the Prime Minister had to admit her deal would have been rejected by a significant margin if the vote had gone ahead. The Prime Minister may hope to play this to the wire. However, with so much at stake, we need to avoid the catastrophe of a no-deal Brexit and the devastating consequences this would have on jobs, growth, public safety, food supply and living standards. The Prime Minister's decision to attempt to plough forward with her bad Brexit deal is very worrying, given the lack of information being provided by government to enable effective planning for a no-deal Brexit. I've written to the Prime Minister to highlight the concerns that the London Resilience Forum and other agencies have about London not being given this information and it being shared with us. Postponing the withdrawal agreement vote in Parliament means the only sensible course of action left is to revoke Article 50 immediately. It is time for a fundamental rethink about how we take this crucial decision for the future of our country and the futures of our children and grandchildren. The real tragedy is that the Prime Minister has wasted the last 2 years pursuing a Brexit deal she can't even unite her own cabinet or her party around, let alone the country, at the expense of focusing on the NHS, social care, education and policing. In the absence of a general election, withdrawing Article 50 would allow time for a public vote to be held so the country can decide what course it wants to take. Failure to do so would risk us having to explain to future generations why the government of the day knowingly put our economy, our prosperity and our place on the world stage in such grave peril.
Well, thank you for that answer, and I very much agree with you. Lame duck Prime Minister Theresa May is again kicking the can down the road if a lame duck can kick a can. There's little road left in the cul-de-sac she's in, and the brick wall's getting ever closer. The risk of a no-deal Brexit is looming larger, despite there being a clear majority in Parliament and the country against it. The Conservatives are now squandering £2 billion on no-deal government preparations based on what they call a war footing, which perhaps explains their lack of success in negotiations in their attitude. They're also telling belatedly businesses to do the same, with no thought as to how much the cost will be for them. So just how wary Londoners should be of a no-deal outcome on the 29th of March?
I think we should be really concerned. We should be really concerned because it's quite clear this Prime Minister is acting in the interest of her job rather than the jobs of thousands and millions of Londoners and those across our country. It is the case, by the way, that the £2 billion that's being used to plan for a no-deal scenario could well be spent on the NHS, on our police, on our schooling, on youth services, but it's not. And we hear heckling from the Conservatives. They should be deeply ashamed of the way their Prime Minister has been conducting negotiations. And what's really important is that the government said during the conference season we'd have the end of austerity. If there is a money tree, we want the fruits of that tree to be used on public services rather than to preserve ideological cravings of backbench MPs. And what I want the Prime Minister to do is, instead of throwing red meat to our backbenchers, start thinking about what's best for our country.
Well, thank you, and I agree with that as well. We've seen the value of the pound drop yet again to its lowest level for 18 months on news of the vote postponement, and we've seen growth in the economy slow down, and the outline of the Conservatives' proposed immigration scheme as it affects EU nationals, which will leave many public and private sector jobs unfilled, particularly in the NHS. What will be the likely impact on London's economy of this future chaos, further chaos? And will you redouble your efforts to campaign for a second referendum to head off a no-deal Brexit?
Well, can I tell you, we're already seeing, and it beggars belief that Conservatives are heckling a question that it goes to the core of our economy going forward. The value of the pound going down regularly may be a boon for our tourist industry, but it has huge impact in relation to exports. It has a huge impact in relation to those EU citizens who are now choosing to go to other countries where there are stronger currencies, so remittances sent back home are worth more back home. But also we're seeing, as a consequence of the hostile environment created by the government's immigration policy, fewer people choosing to come here, and more people leaving than would otherwise be the case. And what I'd say to the government is, if it is the case that we're about to fall off the cliff edge with no deal, surely the sensible course of action is to pause. It's possible to pause, we know now from the ECJ, but also from what the EU is saying, by either delaying Article 50 taking place on March 29th, 11 p.m, or by withdrawing the Article 50. And it begs the question, why does a Prime Minister not want to take the sensible course of action to avoid a catastrophe? And the answer must be because all she cares about is her job, rather than the jobs of thousands of other Londoners and people around the country.
Thank you.
And the next question is from Assembly Member Duval on EU Londoners.
Thank you, Chair. I've made it clear that despite Brexit, the over 1 million EU citizens living in London are Londoners and are welcome in the greatest city in the world. The government has dragged its feet in securing the rights of EU nationals. They should never have been bargaining chips in negotiations. They are our friends, neighbours and colleagues and should be treated with dignity and humanity. I'm particularly concerned that the government is not doing enough to make sure that the hardest to reach and vulnerable EU Londoners are prepared for the biggest change in rights and immigration status for a generation. It is my duty as Mayor to do everything that I can to ensure that all Londoners have the information and support they need to secure their rights. That's why I'm taking specific action to make sure we're reaching the most vulnerable Londoners. The new EU Londoners Hub, which 17,000 people have already signed up for, will make sure that EU citizens and their families have the information and guidance they need about living in London after we leave the EU. It will continue to be updated in the coming months to ensure that it reflects the latest government position and is accessible to all Londoners who need the service. This includes being translated into European languages and hosting downloadable resources which outreach workers can use. But for the most vulnerable EU residents, such as the elderly, disabled, homeless, we know that information and guidance online isn't enough. They will need the support of trusted local and community services. And that's why the Hub also includes a comprehensive list of services that Londoners can access locally in their community. This list of services is broken down by borough and includes immigration advice, translation services, mental health support and charities that support vulnerable people. I'm also helping civil society and community organisations to deliver direct on-the-ground outreach to EU Londoners, including free legal advice through a micro-grant programme. There are already 10 projects underway working with Roma communities, disabled people, rough sleepers, older people and other vulnerable groups, with more to follow. We're also working with London councils, the Local Government Association and the No Recourse to Public Funds Network to help local authorities get the information and resources they need to support the children and vulnerable adults in their care to access their rights. Finally, I'm reaching out to EU Londoners through social and diaspora media at local tube stations with large EU populations, through stakeholders and community leaders via our London is Open campaign to ensure that everyone hears the message that EU citizens living in London belong here and that they know how to access the information they need to stay. I'll unashamedly continue to do everything in my power to ensure that the right information and support reaches EU Londoners so they can have access to their rights as secured citizenship and settled status. EU citizens deserve nothing less.
Can I thank you for the work that you've done in creating the hub, and I think it's most welcomed in terms of providing information in an era where government institutions are all over the place and not providing information and causing more distress and harm than should be at this moment in time. I particularly want to also thank you. I mean, I was approached by a member of the Post Committee who thanked the GLA. I think the chair of the Assembly might have been present, and yourself. You put the event on. The Polish community is older and established community, but it's also a new community, and it was much welcomed in terms of reaching out to that group. I specifically want to start looking and owning on particularly about children of EU nationals, considering the Prime Minister's involvement in the Windrush scandal, direct involvement in creating a mess around issues that had legitimacy to stay in this country but were forced to leave through other actions. What can we do in walking the extra mile about protecting children who have to be in all that listing that you said, some of the most vulnerable, and need, mums and dads need to get it right into giving them future protection, because this is their home. This is their country now. This is their home because they've chosen to do that. What can we do that to give some protection?
Really good question. So you will know, because you meet them like I do, 16, 17, 18-year-olds who've lived here all their lives, and they apply for university, they're told they can't because of their lack of secured status. We've got to make sure we don't have a generation also facing similar problems caused by changes made as a consequence of us leaving, if we do leave the European Union. So I've announced today we'll be helping our staff in relation to paying their fees for secured, settled status. The EU portal actually is very good. The information on there now is very good in relation to signposting, letting you know who the experts are, giving you advice. We're going to build on that to make sure EU Londoners, parents, carers, know what to do for their children and don't wait to do that at some future date. But separately, the outreach work is crucial. You will know many of the people we're talking about haven't got access to app or a website, and so human beings need to transfer this information. The good news, the GLA has a good reputation amongst these communities. I mean, for reasons that we know, the government's reputation has been tarnished, and these communities lack confidence going to the government, and they're a bit suspicious of the government. Those that have credibility need to do more. We've got credibility, all assembly members of all sides, and so you yourselves can register, and when you receive the information, pass it on to people you know. But it's so important we get this status right, because what we don't want is talented scientists, sports people, entrepreneurs, innovators leaving our city because of lack of secure status.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. The next question is from Assembly Member Devonish and is on democratic oversight.
Thank you, Chair. I take democratic oversight seriously. In the context of London Government, democratic oversight has three principal dimensions: the Assembly's scrutiny oversight of the mayoralty, my accountability to Londoners, and my executive oversight of the GLA Group. In terms of the scrutiny oversight provided by the Assembly, since coming into office, I've attended 27 Mayor's Question Time meetings and 13 plenary sessions. This year alone, I've been in front of the Assembly several times to present mayoral strategies, so there's proper democratic oversight. In doing so, I've answered over 11,200 mayoral questions and over 460 plenary questions. In terms of my accountability to Londoners, I've refreshed the format for the State of London debate, including my deputy mayors on the panel, with live streaming of the event on Facebook with subtitles. Similarly, People's Question Time has now been to boroughs it's never been to before, including Barking and Dagenham, Sutton, Hounslow, and most recently Islington. The GLA answered 934 Freedom of Information requests in 2017-18, and this year we look to have over 1,000 FOI requests. To put into context, under my predecessor, the GLA answered on average just over 450 FOI requests each year. And over the last 2 years, over 90% of FOI requests have been answered within the deadline, something that only happened twice for the entirety of my predecessor's mayoralty. So not only has the level of FR requests doubled since I became mayor, but response times have been quicker than under the previous administration. In terms of my executive oversight of the functional bodies in the GLA Group, when I became mayor, we revised the Corporate Governance Framework Agreement to make it more directive and require all of them, even those not covered by local government legislation, to publish papers and decisions, data and information on their transparency arrangements. Where necessary, I'll use my statutory powers of direction to ensure the functional bodies comply with my democratic mandate. I've issued almost 20 mayoral directions, the majority to TfL, on issues such as disposal of property to support my affordable housing programme and to challenge the third runway at Heathrow. In addition to this, individual governance directions for some bodies require my approval for the most important matters, for example, LLDC issuing major grants or the LFC adopting the fire safety plan.
Mr. Mayor, do you agree that one important aspect of democratic oversight is politicians answering to their constituents?
Yep.
In Westminster, residents were clear that they considered your plans for Oxford Street to be unacceptable. Even Westminster Council's Labour group opposed your view. In the light of this, do you agree that engaging respectfully with boroughs and residents and taking their views is an important part of democratic oversight?
I don't accept that the local government elections in May 2018 in Westminster were a referendum on my plans with the council to pedestrianise Oxford Street. There were different views from residents in Westminster, from residents in the boroughs next to Westminster, and in residents across our city. Different views amongst businesses, small, medium and large. Different views amongst cyclists, those who are pedestrians, those who are black cab drivers, those who are minicabs. And what we did in the 2 years up to the council doing a U-turn and pulling the rug is consult, listen, engage with all these various stakeholders. That's what led to the plans evolving and changing from what they originally conceived at to what they were before the council pulled the plug. And there were further tweaks and amendments that could have been made to address some of the concerns raised by residents. But rather than council working with us and TfL and others to address some of the concerns, legitimate concerns, that some residents had, they decided to pull the plug. I don't think that's legitimate, and I think they should have worked with us to work up viable plans to address concerns that have been there for some time about Oxford Street.
Your letter to the leader of Westminster City Council of this month, officers, business, the community, they've never seen a ruder letter. The tone of this letter, when you accuse my leader and the council of doing some of the things you've said today, we have the right to listen to our residents and our businesses and even the Labour Council group in Westminster. Do you believe this tone is acceptable for democratic oversight?
I'm very happy for the letter to be published, Chair. I don't think it's a rude letter.
Well,
I think it does express my anger, my frustration, the way the council has behaved. The council has behaved very, very badly. And the leader of the council should accept responsibility for the way her council has behaved. Literally, hundreds of thousands of taxpayers' money has been wasted on this scheme because of the actions of the council. Hours and hours and hours and hours of businesses, of councillors, of residents, of TfL staff, of City Hall staff have been involved in meetings in the 2 years before the council pulled the plug. The way the council, by the way, told us of their decision to walk away from Oxford Street is disgraceful. And I don't apologise at all for expressing my anger at the actions of that council.
Mr Mayor, you actually say in your letter, the one polite thing you say, thank you say to my leader in the council for personally briefing me on the new plans. You were told before anybody else.
Hold on a sec, Chair. Well, Chair, I'm very grateful.
Do not listen to boroughs. That is the problem. London boroughs have responsibility for their residents, and you are not prepared to listen to our residents and our businesses. It's your arrogance, Mr Mayor.
Is that a question, Chair?
It didn't sound like.
No, it didn't to me either, but I'll answer it anyway. So what the letter refers to, what the letter refers to, Chair, it's really important to clarify deliberate or unintentional misleadings from assembly members. What the letter refers to
from the Mayor
is what the letter refers to is the briefing given about the new plans, not a briefing about the council walking away from an agreement to pedestrianise Oxford Street, worked over many weeks, many months, and 2 years. And so the Assembly member is either intentionally or unintentionally misleading the Assembly. Now, it's for you, Chair, to decide what the Assembly member is doing, but he's trying to give the impression that the Leader of the Council told me before in an informal briefing that she was going to walk away from the plans. She didn't do so.
Well, I was going to finish up by wishing you a Merry Christmas, Mr Mayor, and hoping that we could have a better tone of dialogue with Westminster City Council in the new year, but I'm afraid you don't seem to want to listen to my residents or my businesses, so I'll leave it there.
Okay, Assembly Member Prince.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Mr Mayor.
Thank you.
I'm sure that all members understand that you don't write every word of your written answers to Mayor's questions. However, can you assure us that you do read every answer before it's sent? And in terms of democratic oversight, every answer accurately represents your views?
Chair, I don't read every single written question that's sent out from the office, but I try and read as many as I can.
All right. Thank you. Can you also confirm that if you made a promise as a mayoral candidate to do something as mayor, it's reasonable for Londoners to expect you to keep that promise regardless of whether or not you repeat that promise in your manifesto?
Well, no, it's really important to just remind colleagues who have fought elections, and I speak as somebody who's won them all, how elections work. The way it works is during a campaign, you have various hustings, various debates, various discussion, and what you do is they lead towards a process where you write a manifesto, and then you have further debate, discussions, debates before the election. The offer to the electorate is the manifesto. The manifesto is what you're standing on to try and win the election, whether you're standing for council, whether you're standing for parliament, whether you're standing to be an assembly member, or whether you're standing to be the mayor. And when you win the election, if you win the election, that manifesto gives you a mandate to carry through things you said in your manifesto. So I'll give you one example. My manifesto said that I would freeze TfL fares during my first term of being the mayor. And the context of the manifesto promise was in the previous 8 years, fares have gone up by more than 42%. And so I've got a mandate from the electorate to freeze those TfL fares. By the way, another one was in relation to...
I could counter every one that you give with two that you haven't kept, but I don't want to go into your manifesto promises. Can you...
So is that question,
So what you're saying is that when you are at an event, when you're say, call it the hustings that we have prior to an election, when you're standing there either on your own or with your counterparts. Anything that you say, Mr. Mayor, cannot be believed. Is that what you're saying?
It depends what it is. I mean, for example, if you sign a pledge, that's different from a hustings. So if you have a manifesto, I mean, so look, let me give you an example. I'll give you an example.
Really?
If you sign a pledge that says, for example, that I will abolish tuition fees.
Yeah.
Good
right?
one.
And then,
good one.
Right? Sure. And then you win the election and you treble them. That's clearly a broken promise, right? I'm sure it's in the manifesto, but it may not have been. So it's context, isn't it?
So you're saying it's only written promises that you abide by?
I'm saying it's context.
Not assurances that you give the electorate at a hustings.
I'll give you an example. Look, Keith, let me give you an example.
Can I give you an example?
No. You've asked a question. I'm a chair.
Let me give you an example, and then you can answer, and you can.
This should be called assembly speeches rather than mayor's question time.
You can swap examples. I quite like the last one, actually.
Yeah. So, Mr. Mayor, in your response to Assembly Member Devonish in October this year, you said whoever wrote the answer to his question said, to be clear, I did not make a promise of 0 strikes. Is that correct, Mr. Mayor?
That is correct.
You did not make promises.
No.
So, when in February 2016 you spoke at the West Thames College in Isleworth, you said, as Mayor, and I think we both agree on this, as Mayor, what I will do is roll up my sleeves and make sure that I'm talking to everyone who runs public transport to make sure there are 0 days of strikes. When you said that, you didn't mean it, or it wasn't in writing, or they hadn't read that this will only apply if I manage to put it in my manifesto.
I'm quite clear. I was there. You're relying upon it, something written in the newspaper about what I said. What I'm clear is any strike is a sign of failure. Any strike is a sign of failure.
That, yeah.
And we want 0 strikes. I don't result from that. Because if you have a strike, it means all the other tools in the toolkit of a trade union and employer have been lost. And that's why it's really important to roll up your sleeves and to talk to those who represent hard-working staff. And by the way, trade unions play an invaluable role in not simply improving the terms and conditions of the staff, but making a place of work more productive. I appreciate Conservatives there are heckling when I talk about the benefits of trade unionism. I don't resile away from talking about the benefits of trade unionism. And I'd say this, since I became the Mayor of London, as a consequence of constructive relations with the trade unions, we've had 65% fewer strikes than when the previous mayor was the Mayor of London. And that shows the difference we can make working together. The reality is this, any time there is a strike, whether it's at TfL, whether it's in an FE college, whether it's in a private place of work, whether it's at airports, that is a sign of failure. And we should always aspire to have 0 strikes.
So on the 9th of January in 2017, one of your spokesman on your behalf was quoted in City AM saying, the Mayor retains an ambition of 0 strikes. Was he not agreeing with you either then?
I think we should all aspire, have an ambition to have 0 strikes. Of course we should. It's heartbreaking when workers have had to put down their tools and leave a place of work to go on strike. It means that something's broken down. It means the system of negotiation is not working. So I always encourage both an employer and a trade union to sit around a table and work things out. And by the way, the same applies to those Tory MPs walking out when it comes to the Prime Minister wanting to do a good deal in relation to leaving the European Union. Don't walk away, don't sulk, get around the table, sort this out.
But you're adamant then that you have never promised that you would have 0 strikes.
Look, I am ambitious for our city. I want us to have 0 strikes in all walks of life, not just TfL, in other walks of life as well. Look, when there's a strike, not only do commuters suffer getting from A to B on shopping trips, it means students suffer getting to a place where they're studying. It means people going to an employment suffer. It means businesses suffer. It means those workers lose a day's wage. TfL suffers with revenues lost. Of course, we want to avoid strikes, and we should have an ambition towards having 0 strikes. That's why I'm really proud. I am really proud. Since I've been Mayor, we've reduced the strikes by around 65%. I'm sure you would praise that.
Mr. Mayor, let's, this is Christmas time, isn't it?
Well, Tony wants to take it away.
We're, you know, I think
Tony withdrew saying Merry
Mr.
Christmas.
Mayor, we're conducting this exchange in, I think,
Humbug.
relatively good humour.
He's Grinch, he is. He's Grinch.
Yeah, I was going to use that line in you. I won't bother now. But the bottom line is, you know, you made a commitment that there would be 0 strikes. That hasn't happened. Would you, in the spirit of Christmas, apologise to Londoners that you haven't been able to deliver that?
Look,
That it has, you know, it has failed, and you promise that you'll do better, Mr. Mayor.
Can I
especially for this weekend coming.
Can I use this opportunity at Christmas, Chair, to thank every single member of TfL staff who works their socks off.
Yeah,
whether you drive a bus, whether you drive a tube, whether you drive a tram, whether you drive an overground train, whether you're in one of our stations, whether you're in one of our bus garages, I want to thank you for what you do day in, day out, week in, week out. I'm proud to be your mayor.
But you won't apologise to the people of London?
Well, I think London has recognised we've had a 65% reduction in strikes since I was mayor. They're looking towards me building on that going forward, and I intend to continue to have good relations with all the trade unions. By the way, can I wish the trade unions happy Christmas as well, Chair? They work really hard representing those hard-working staff. I enjoy my meetings with them. We've got a constructive relationship and a lot of progress made because of our good dialogue with trade unions.
Right. Well, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think that's everybody can see exactly where we are. Thank you.
Are you withdrawing your Merry Christmas as well?
I will be asking you another question. I will happily wish you a Merry Christmas when that happens.
Assembly Member Boff.
I don't want any premature Merry Christmases.
Okay. Assembly Member Boff.
Mr. Mayor, do you believe that consultation is an important part of democratic oversight?
I do, Chair.
Do you believe, Mr. Mayor, that you have adequately consulted over your proposals for the TfL junk food advertising ban?
I think we have, and we when it comes to consultation, we've built on and do as much as probably more than previous mayors have done. So in relation to the plans to ban the advertising of junk food on the TfL estate, there was a long period of consultation, and I'm confident that the consultation was done properly.
Okay, Mr. Mayor. We know that butter, olive oil, cheese, mayonnaise, soy sauce and stock cubes, and pesto will be banned from being advertised on the TfL estate. Was that, do you think those products would have been banned had you adequately consulted?
What we did, Chair, was TfL spoke to the Food Standards Authority, FSA, but also Public Health England. So the consultation was around the advice received from the expert bodies. TfL are experts in public health. And so the consultation was using the advice from them, and the ban on the junk food adverts is using the best advice from them. And generally speaking, it's foods that are high in fat, sugar or salt, and there's a definition that they have in relation to good fats and bad fats, and which I'm not an expert on, but I'm happy for...
You would say that that was an intended consequence of the ban is to ban adverts for stock cubes, you know,
I think
Oxos.
I'm confident that TfL have taken the advice from
There are other
relevant...
stock cubes, may I say, but Oxo should cropped into my mind.
Sorry, I didn't hear that.
Well, I think he was making a joke about...
It's just that you banning the advertising of Oxo cubes on the underground.
I can't go into specifics, but what I do know is that TfL took advice from public health experts in food when it came to the consultation, and in relation to the junk food advert bans that are due to come in due course.
Mr. Mayor, in September, in answer to a question by Assembly Member Bacon, you said that my officials are working with industry partners to ensure we minimise any unintended consequences. Do you think those unintended consequences have been removed?
I hope so, yeah, Chair. I mean, the TfL has spent a lot of time working with those in the industry to make sure that this is got right. So, for example, it is product, not the brand. And so that's one of the conversations, I think, that flowed from the conversations that were had with industry leaders. Also looking at examples elsewhere in the world, Amsterdam being the obvious example. But a lot of work that's taken place during the formal consultation process, there's work that took place before the consultation began, and I'm confident that the recommendations made by TfL are the right ones.
I made an inquiry yesterday, Mr. Mayor, because there was, of course, a consultation document about the food safety, your food strategy. And I made an inquiry just the other day about the list of people who had been consulted to create the food strategy. And of course, the first one on the 11th of May, TfL are now confirmed didn't actually happen. And that's in your published consultation strategy. Are you still confident that consultation was adequate?
I am, Chair.
One of the adverts that's been appearing on the Underground is an advert for NatWest Advertising. It's advertising its phone banking app, and it contains a child with an ice cream. Would that be banned?
Chair, I should declare an interest. I bank with NatWest, and so it's just worth me declaring that for the avoidance of any doubt. I also enjoy ice creams as well. I'm not going to go into specific examples about what are or aren't banned, but during the consultation, examples were given. And so if a brand wants to advertise its product, I think the advice to them would be to use a different product rather than something that could be construed as being high in foods, high in fats, sugars, or salt. But I'm not going to talk about specific adverts, otherwise we'll be here all day.
Well, I think TfL have confirmed that will be banned. There's a Go Compare advert featuring that really annoying singer that's also on the, I mean, actually, featuring him is a good enough reason to have it banned, but there's a Go Compare advert that features him holding a pizza. Now, obviously, Go Compare is not advertising pizza. That TfL have confirmed that would be banned. Is that an intended consequence, Mr. Mayor, of your ban?
Chair, I mean, if TfL have answered the question, I'm not really sure how else I can help. The point is we want to discourage pressure being put on children in particular. They're putting pressure on their parents and carers to buy foods that are high in fats, sugars and salts. We've seen in other cities where they've brought in, as part of a package of measures, it's got to be part of a package of measures, advertising junk foods being banned. There are other ways, by the way, an insurance company or a bank can advertise without necessarily enticing young people in particular to buy foods that aren't great for them. In moderation, sure, it's okay. But what we do know is in London we've got a massive obesity and overweight problem. 4 out of 10 children aged 11 are obese or overweight, and this is part of a package of measures to tackle that. I don't apologise for that at all.
No, it's a very serious problem that we have to face, and this Assembly wants you to take the most effective action possible and use the evidence that's available that is to put the most effective measures into place to tackle childhood obesity. This is about a measure that appears to me to be ineffective. And you go on about moderation. Of course, moderation is not mentioned in the food strategy report. There is a simple ban on everything that's high fat, salt and sugar, on every single thing that's featured. I mean, I've done the... You accused Assembly Member Devonish of being a Grinch, was it, earlier, Mr. Mayor? I've done the calculations on Tesco's mince pies and Christmas puddings. They would be banned on the Underground as well, wouldn't they, Mr. Mayor?
I'm not going to go into specifics, but I'm sure if the Assembly wants to speak to TfL, they can advise
Mr. Mayor, if TfL were to, I mean, I've done the calculations. It's ever so clear from the strategy what you have to do. You calculate the amount of sugar, the amount of salt in a product, and if it's higher than that, then it gets banned. So, Mr. Mayor, does that make you Scrooge? If you're banning Christmas puddings and mince pies on the Underground, as I said, you accused Assembly Member Devonish of being a Grinch. Surely that makes you a Scrooge, does it not, Mr. Mayor? Was that, Mr. Mayor, an intended consequence of your policy?
Chair, I mean, what can I say to that? I mean, I'm literally speechless.
Dickens wouldn't have, I'm sure Dickens wouldn't have been.
Mr. Mayor, I'm just looking for a reply. Was that an intended consequence of your policy?
So, Chair, let me try and answer the question. So, it was never my intention to be Ebenezer Scrooge. Does that help?
Was it your intention to ban mince pies and Christmas puddings from the Underground?
I think the intention was to ban adverts for junk food, and so that's what the consultation was about. That's what the plans are, and in due course, those adverts will be banned.
Mr. Mayor, if I'm not allowed to use props, but if I were, I would show you this. And this is an advert this is an advert for Macmillan Coffee Mornings, which has been running on the Underground. According to your health food strategy, advertising for Macmillan Coffee Mornings, which obviously goes to support victims of support people with cancer, would be banned on the TfL network.
Chair, can I, look,
was that, Mr. Mayor, an intended consequence of your ban on HFSS food?
Chair, I've been quite happy for this line of questioning because it runs down time, so I don't get any hard questions. So let me deal with the questions that he's asked. Look, we know from our conversations with those who advertise on TfL that they're very happy to tweak their adverts to make sure they don't fall foul of the ban on junk food adverts. And that's one of the reasons why we can predict with some accuracy that as far as potential revenues lost, they're not going to be near anywhere as big as some have threatened or predicted that they are going to be. So, for example, I'd be astonished if Macmillan Coffee Mornings were advertised on the TfL estate in the future as they have been in the past. I'd be astonished if my bank, NatWest, didn't continue to advertise at a similar level on TfL in the future as they do in the past. I'd be very surprised if Go Compare, which is another example given by the Assembly member, didn't advertise in the future on TfL estate as it does in the past. And I would also be astonished, Chair, if Sainsbury's, which is the example given by the Assembly member in relation to his mince pies, also didn't advertise some of their products on the TfL estate. And the reality is this: whether it comes to poor quality air, whether it comes to obesity, one of the options that we have is to have a head in the sands and ignore it. That's the options the Conservatives want us to follow. I'm not willing to do so, Chair. I think we have a health crisis when it comes to obesity and overweightness in our children. These children have problems when they're young being obese or overweight, but these problems will carry forward to when they become adults. From a whole host of issues, from heart disease, from increased chances of having cancer, to being a burden of the National Health Service, but also quality of life and enjoyment. And if we can take measures to make sure there are fewer children who are obese or overweight, fewer adults who are obese who are overweight, increased productivity as a result of healthier adults, but also less of a cost to the NHS, I will do so. They may criticise me, he may even try to mock me. I'm not going to resolve from my commitment to making our city as healthy as it possibly can. Merry Christmas.
Mr. Mayor, thank you for that. So, the point of the question, perhaps you've lost track of what these questions are about. And I apologise for that. It's difficult to pay attention when you're in that sort of panic state that you're obviously in. The point of this question was about democratic oversight, and it was about consultation and the adequacy of your consultation. In the consultation document, it revealed that many members of the industry said there will be unintended consequences as a result of introducing a ban that you then rushed out. People from the industry said it would be better if they were given 6 months' notice of this, because apparently this most pro-business of mayors is giving the advertising industry virtually a month to be able to rejig all their advertising campaigns. Do you think, bearing in mind all these anomalies that I've listed, and I can go on, and I often do, but I could go on and on about this, but the fact is it exposes that this policy was rushed out with inadequate consultation, and that should be a job that you should be concentrating on, consulting with Londoners. Do you not think that this consultation, Mr. Mayor, has been a failure?
So, Chair, on the one hand, I've got a choice, which is to listen to people who make millions and millions of pounds advertising junk food to kids, and Assembly Member Boff.
I'm asking to consult with Macmillan Cancer
on the other hand,
making millions.
I can listen to the Chief Medical Officer.
Did you talk
I
to
can listen to those who are experts in cancer, those who are experts in health, those who are experts in other countries, those who are experts in fighting obesity and overweightness. And I chose to listen to the latter. Now, Senator Boff may not like it, But a consultation doesn't mean that every single person's views are followed. That is simply impossible, because in a consultation, you have a divergence of views.
Mr. Mayor,
And you have a
countries?
deliberation based upon qualitative responses, based upon quantity, based upon the evidence people rely upon. But you'll understand, Chair, why people who make millions from advertising junk food to kids are quite unhappy about their ability to advertise on our estate being taken away from them.
Mr. Mayor, which other countries did you consult with?
We looked at other models around the world, Amsterdam being one model we looked at. We looked at other places around the world who have a package of measures to make their citizens safer. It is the case that London is one of the most obese and overweight cities in the whole of Europe. There must be something that other cities are doing that we can learn from. That's one of the reasons, by the way, Chair, we're encouraging more people to walk and cycle. Walking and cycling is not only a good way of getting people to move around our city, but at least people being healthier and more active. Cleaning up the air in London. If we can clean up the air in London, more people will be encouraged to walk and cycle than is otherwise the case. And that's why it's really important we take these measures. I'm not willing to have my head in the sand like some want me to do.
Mr. Mayor, I'm pleased you talked about Amsterdam, where they had marvellous progress in addressing childhood obesity. And of course, they didn't introduce an advertising ban until after they got the positive results. Before they managed to, they did plenty of other measures about portion control, about making available healthy foods to young people, before they did an advertising ban. So what we're saying is that you're coming up with policies without adequate consultation and without adequate evidence. And I'm surprised that you can't see that, Mr. Mayor.
Look, Chair.
But perhaps we should finish there.
Chair, I mean, by the way, can I say, the Assembly member accused me of being Scrooge for wanting to ban adverts for junk food on our underground. Can you imagine what he called me if I'd have got into portion sizes in relation to other characters from Dickens? But he's right. He's right. Well, quite. He's right that we need to have a package of measures from what food is served in schools, from not having fast food takeaways, new ones opening up near schools. Those fast food outlets are around, making sure their food is healthier, making sure in poorer parts of our city in particular there is accessibility to fresh fruit, fresh vegetable, fresh produce, and a whole package of measures. This is what we're doing from City Hall with the levers that we have. But one of the things we can do is use our convening power, and I'll do that to work with other partners to make sure we make progress.
Okay. Had you finished?
I've done. Thank you.
Yes. Assembly Member Sahota.
Of course. Look, I want to congratulate you for being a very pro-health mayor. Air quality is a big issue here, and so is obesity. And I know that you've taken very brave decisions, but can you tell us, despite hearing the views of the advertising industry, who has welcomed your policy? I know the members of government and health. Can you just tell us who has welcomed this policy?
Chair, this is a good example. This is a good example of who I listen to. So you've got an Assembly member who is a medical doctor or one who isn't, and we know what his interests are. And again, good example of somebody with expert evidence from the work he does in his practice, but also speaking to other health experts who have welcomed the measures we are taking. And Senator Sahota's right to remind me, because I forgot, there is a long list of experts, professionals, groups, national government welcoming the actions we've taken, including, dare I say, Conservatives, who quite like the idea of politicians, and I'll accept this, interfering with the market where the market is causing adverse problems to our community, including the most vulnerable. And, you know, I'll have those people praising my efforts any day of the week rather than those, including those who make millions from advertising junk food, and Assembly Member Boff, criticising our actions.
I know, Mr. Mayor, many Londoners will be thanking you for helping these parents reduce the pressure upon them to buy unhealthy food for children. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
The next question is in the name of Assembly Member Pidgeon, and it's on cleaning London's bus fleet.
Thank you, Chair. I'm confident that London's bus fleet will be zero emission by 2037 or sooner. This is part of our ambitious plans to clean up London's polluted air, which leads to thousands of early deaths each year, as well as a host of health conditions, including cancer, asthma and dementia. TfL's plans for the transition to a zero-emission fleet strike the right balance between being ambitious but realistic and allowing time for vehicles to develop and reduce in cost. I've already started to take action. London's bus fleet is already one of the cleanest in the world, with 86% of buses operating in central London being ULEZ compliant. To give you a comparison, Only 1.6% of all city buses in Europe are electric. In total, there are over 6,000 buses that meet the ULEZ standards. But we're going even further, and from January 2018, no more new diesel buses have been bought. London will have 150 zero-emission vehicles in early 2019, making it one of the largest city fleets in the world. These are spread across many routes and are all contributing to cleaner air. From 2020, I'll be bringing in only zero-emission buses on single-decker routes, and by the first half of 2020, there will be 250 zero-emission buses as more routes convert. As a stepping stone to zero-emission, I'm already cleaning up the fleet. London's bus fleet is already one of the cleanest in the world, with more than 60% of its vehicles at the ultra-clean Euro 6 engine standard, and we're on course to meet my objective, all buses being at this standard or better by 2020. And we've also cleaned up existing diesel buses on 7 low-emission bus zones in some of the most polluted areas of London. Putney High Street, because of the zone, hourly exceedances of NO2 have been reduced by 99% and annual concentrations by nearly 50%. At Brixton, the low-emission bus zone has reduced hourly exceedances of nitrogen dioxide by 85% and annual concentrations by nearly 20%. At the New Cross low-emission bus zone, which I launched last month, we've already seen an 11% fall in annual concentrations. But we can't achieve our 2037 target alone, and I'm encouraging our international partners to play their part too.
Okay, I frequently see references to your target for single-decker buses to be replaced with electric or hydrogen models by 2020. But crucially, it's only those in central London which will be replaced by then, and that amounts to only about 200 or so buses out of a total single-decker fleet of 2,600. Why must Londoners wait 17 years for all single-decker buses to make that switch?
A variety of reasons. They've been made fast enough, the infrastructure. Some of our garages will need to switch over. They currently only have one fuel way of doing it. So Waterloo is a good example. In Waterloo, we've managed to switch over to electric, but it's getting all that ready and in place. The good news, you mentioned single-decker. Next summer, we'll have 68 double-decker electric buses joining the fleet. And so the combination of those things, getting them in plan to make sure we're ready. We're also trying to put pressure on the government and those in the utility companies to make sure the grid has renewable sources of energy as well. But it's part of a package of measures. And you're right, we want to go as fast as we can.
Okay, you talked at the beginning about zero emission by 2037, but are you aware that London's electric and hydrogen buses are not zero emission? That whilst they emit zero harmful exhaust emissions, every electric bus is fitted with a heater run off a diesel engine. So have you assessed the impact on air quality of polluting ancillary engines from London's buses, and what are you doing to address this additional area of pollution? So
TfL's doing quite a bit working with, I mentioned towards the end of my answer, I didn't finish because I wanted to give you a chance to ask supplementaries, but working with international partners, and by that we mean manufacturers in particular. So one of the things we did in my first year was have a conference here, and we encouraged not just purchasers but also manufacturers to come to explain what our needs are. You're right, we've got to make sure that there aren't other things on a bus that leads to emissions, and that's one example. The good news is technology is moving really fast. If we can encourage other cities to be customers, then the manufacturer will invest in the technology. So some of the battery life has exceeded because of the work we've done. And so I'm confident that because of purchasing power of other cities, the technology will advance as well. It can't be beyond the wit of the manufacturers to have heating systems that aren't diesel.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Assembly Member Eshalomi on the TfL business plan.
Thank you, Chair. TfL's business plan outlines how it will continue to invest significantly in making London a cleaner, safer and healthier place by tackling air pollution and supporting changes to travel in London so that more journeys can be made by public transport, cycling or walking. TfL is investing considerably to meet my goal to eliminate death and serious injuries on London's roads and the wider transport network by 2041, and to modernise the transport network, ease crowding and make travelling easier and more accessible for all Londoners. These improvements to public transport will also support many thousands of new homes and jobs across the capital. Specifically, TfL will invest to make vast improvements, including completing the signalling upgrade on the Circle, District, Hampstead City and Metropolitan lines, adding 33% capacity by the end of 2033, major station upgrades such as Bank, Elephant and Castle, as well as opening the Northern Line extension to Battersea, supporting 25,000 jobs and 20,000 new homes, £2.3 billion on transformative projects to make London streets safer, better places for everyone. Junctions like Old Street, Vauxhall Drive Street and Highbury Corner will be made safer, and there will be new livable neighbourhoods across outer London, helping to encourage walking, cycling and cutting polluting car use, and vital air quality and environmental improvements, including the new ultra-low emission zone from April 2019, and making the entire bus fleet Euro 6 compliant by September 2020. These improvements take place in the context of a number of financial challenges for TfL. A subdued UK economy has slowed down ridership across the country and reduced fare revenue. TfL has also had to adapt to the loss of £700 million per year in government funding and the financial impact from the delayed Crossrail. Despite these headwinds, TfL now has a tight grip on its finances and has a track record of delivering savings.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and again, appreciate the financial context that TfL is facing, and happy to see you mention some key projects there. But my concern is that you're postponing a number of several capital projects, which, in a sense, won't be possible without that capital funding from the government. And you also mentioned that there's no certainty of capital funding beyond 2020. Your target for deaths, you have missed that by 10%. So again, I wanted to push you on why you think that we've got no certainty from the government, and if we will see key projects like the Bakerloo line extension in my constituency and the Tulse Hill Gyratory, where almost a year ago to the date, a woman was hit by 4 cars, if you remember, in a really dangerous hit and run. So I'm worried that, projects like that have no certainty under TfL's plans going forward.
You've raised a number of different questions in that one supplementary. Let me try and deal with each of them as I can. Firstly, you mentioned Tulse Hill Gyratory and the awful accident last year. TfL is doing the feasibility work in relation to that gyratory. What we've said in relation to roadworks is, because the government's not giving us money towards roads, last year and this year as well, TfL will only do safety critical works. That clearly may be a safety critical piece of work on the Tulse Hill Gyratory. That will happen, but the usual maintenance that would happen in the past is not going to happen. It's just unfair for public transport fare payers to subsidise roads when the central government is taking money out of London. Those of us with cars pay our vehicle excise duty. We pay taxes towards improvements in our roads. The governments that are taking money out of London. By the way, as Slimmer Dismore said, saving £2 billion for a no-deal scenario. Again, an example of how that money could be used. But the safety critical work will carry on. The second issue you raised is in relation to certainty of money from central government. The comprehensive spending review, which is coming next year, will let us know how much capital we'll be getting in years going forward. And until we have certainty from that, we simply can't afford to make plans and start procurement on things that may or may not happen. That's why some of these things may be pushed back a little bit. As far as the Bakerloo line extension is concerned, one of the pieces of work we did with Treasury is to see if there is a funding model of land value capture to help pay for some of this scheme. Both the councils there have been fantastic in relation to being up for this. The local parliamentarians are also up for this. The community wants this to happen. But we need a way of paying for the increased expenditure caused by an extension. The Northern Line extension was paid for by a form of business rates retention, but also by the developers, another funding regime. We're looking for another innovative way to fund any Bakerloo extension as well.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Can I get you to commit to continuing to work with those local councils, both Southwark and Lewisham, in terms of making sure we continue to make that case to central government, and we don't wait last minute until they finally decide what they're doing before we have a plan in terms of improving that key route in South London?
I'm happy to do so, Chair. It's very important.
Thank you.
Thank you. Assembly Member Arnold on the gangs violence matrix.
Thank you, Chair. In our system of policing by consent, it is vital that we maintain a balance between giving the police the powers and tools they need to keep people safe and ensuring that liberties and rights are protected. My review is part of that process, bringing greater transparency to a vital issue and ensuring that all the different viewpoints are heard and the evidence of the impact of the matrix is reviewed. The gangs matrix has to be proportionate and command confidence, particularly among young black Londoners who are among the many who have expressed concerns. That's why I made it a manifesto commitment to review the gangs matrix. The Information Commissioner's Office found that whilst there was a valid purpose for the Met's gangs matrix, namely to tackle the unacceptable levels of violence we're seeing in the capital, the processes were not being applied consistently and data protection principles had been contravened. It is important that the Met have tools available to them to tackle violence, those who commit violent crime, whether in gangs or not, need to feel the full force of the law. But the ICO's enforcement notice compels the Met to comply with data protection laws in future and gives them 6 months to make improvements. These are serious matters, which is why I welcome both the ICO's findings, which have been worked up with the MOPAC, and the Met's response to them. The MOPAC review will be published soon. It will be the most authoritative and far-reaching review of the gangs matrix ever undertaken. A huge amount of work has gone into the MOPAC review of the gangs matrix, including analysis of data covering the entire lifespan of the matrix, interviews with the practitioners using it, consultation with affected communities, legal opinion, and the creation of a specialist reference group, which Amnesty International and the ICO have been part of to help guide the work. The MOPAC review looks at the impact of the gangs matrix, the processes by which it is operated and governed, and its transparency. In doing so, it explores issues such as disproportionality, inconsistency, legality, and community perceptions. I've discussed these issues with the Commissioner, and I know she takes them seriously.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. As you rightly said, your manifesto of 2016 had a commitment to review the gang matrix. I remember it well. I welcome that commitment. And I believe that it was because so many campaigners had raised it. I had certainly raised it. I know colleagues had raised it when Mayor Johnson oversaw the implementation. Because Londoners forget that the mayor is also the commissioner, the elected commissioner of their police. So when police goes wrong, it's going wrong in the name of the mayor. That's the position many of my constituents take and I take. And so when this was brought to your attention and you put it in your manifesto, everybody thought, well done, we will then get clearer guidelines about its implementation, record keeping. We'll actually get an equality impact assessment which will demonstrate exactly what these two damning reports said, that this had the potential to have a disproportionate effect on young black males. Mr. Mayor, I've got 4 key questions. Why did it take so long to start your promised review? Do you know, can I just put the 4 down on record?
Sorry, yeah, sure.
Do you know how many Londoners have been placed on the matrix since 2016? Because we didn't maybe expect anything much from the previous mayor, but so many Londoners expected some action from you. Given that 40% of people listed on the matrix have no record of involvement in any violent offence, and 35% have never committed a serious event, what steps are being taken to rebuild the credibility of the Met so that Londoners, especially those of BAME heritage, can have trust in this tainted tool? And you say that the gangs matrix is being reviewed and will be released by MOPAC soon. What sort of timeline does soon have in the MOPAC world of things?
Okay, Chair, I think I've got most of those questions. If I haven't, please come back to me in relation to other questions. First, Chair, to put on record, one of the reasons why my manifesto had a commitment to review the gangs matrix was because of lobbying by Senator Member Arnold and others, and she's right to give credit to others as well, in relation to the concerns they had about the gangs matrix. And that wasn't them saying there's not a need for the police to have this operational tool, but it was the way it's been implemented was leading to big concerns. And the reason why that's important is, and this affects everyone, by the way, not just the BAME communities, all of us are kept safer by the public having confidence in the police to give them the intelligence. If some parts of our community have no confidence, they're not going to provide the police with intelligence. Simple as that. So all of us benefit by there being better confidence between the police and members of all our communities. So I undertook to review the gangs matrix, and MOPAC have been tasked with doing so. A couple of things in relation to the MOPAC review. It is the most authoritative review that's ever been undertaken of the gangs matrix. As you said, it goes back a number of years. In the meantime, because we've been working with the ICO, who've published their review and made a number of recommendations, it's meant that we could allow them to go first. They've made recommendations, issued an enforcement notice. The Met could have, by the way, taken a view, we're going to challenge this, we don't accept this. The Commissioner accepts completely the findings of the ICO, the enforcement notice, and the Met will be publishing equality impact assessments, data impact assessments, and the legal mandate that the ICO has asked them to do, and they're also taking other measures to address some of the concerns that the ICO made. By the way, working with MOPAC, ICO made those concerns. I think there is an issue. I think nobody can argue sensibly of disproportionality when you look at the numbers involved in relation to the gang's matrix. To give you an idea of the work the review has undertaken, Chair, they've looked at the entire lifespan of the matrix, and that is 7,000 individuals. So that's a big number in relation to the amount of work they've had to do. They've also surveyed more than 140 practitioners who use the matrix. You'll be aware, Chair, councils, those involved in safeguarding, those involved in public safety, they've been spoken to. There's been a separate review group set up, which includes some of the harshest critics of the matrix. It's not simply talking to those who are on side. We're going to talk to everyone, even those who aren't on side, but also take legal opinion as well from a QC about what steps we can take. I want the review to be published this year. It will be published this year. I'm not taking a break this Christmas, so it will happen this year. As soon as I know the exact date, I will let you know, but it will be this year. And I know it's December 20th, but it's really important we publish it as soon as we can. Is that all the questions?
Mr Mayor, I'm out of time. Let me assure you that I have no intention of letting this matter rest.
Good.
And I should be, with the Chair's permission, joining the committee meeting on this subject on the 10th of January. This is a disgrace.
Assemblymember Bailey.
Mayor, just to follow up on Assemblymember Arnold's question, 78% of the people on the gang matrix are black, young black individuals, young black males, but only responsible for 27% of violent crime. Is there any indication as to why it's slanted so heavily this way? Has this review given any explanation for that, any insight?
I'm not sure I recognise those figures, Chair, but my experience over the last couple of years is 6 out of 10 victims of crime are from BAME Londoners. I've met too many families, bereaved families, grieved families, so I'm not sure the figures that have been referred to and stuff. And also I know I receive daily reports of arrests and charges made that a significant number of those who are arrested, prosecuted and found guilty are also from some of our BME communities. When you look at London's population, the young population, our young population is quite diverse in our city. So you've got the general population, you've got the population of certain boroughs where there is high levels of crime, and then you've got the young population in those boroughs. And that's one of the things that the review's undertaken, not simply looking at the issue of disproportionality, but also population and other issues as well. I think it is the case, from what I've seen, there is disproportionality. Your question goes behind, is a really important question, which is why? Is there an explanation? Sometimes you can justify disproportionality, and that's one of the things the Gangs Matrix Review has sought to do. You'll be aware of the ICO's findings about data breaches. Sure, there's been data breaches that need to be dealt with. It's really important. Jeanette's question was also to do with public confidence. The Met Police has agreed to have a website, explains what's going on. There's a separate issue about public safety caused by breaches. You'll know about the Newham case. And so all these things have been looked at as part of the review. And as I said, it's been an authoritative review. It'll be published this year. And I say that knowing there's only 10 days to go, because I think Jeanette's right. There is a sense of urgency to get this out there so we can try and making sure that Londoners have confidence in this valuable tool that the police use.
I think you're right about the sense of urgency, and the tool is useful as well. It's not about getting rid of it, it's about improving it. But when you look at some of the ICO's recommendations, they talk about what is a gang member, what is it to be in a gang, who's at risk, the difference between someone who's high risk and someone who's low risk, and that not being talked about. And that's why I want to focus on why, because this is an opportunity to help the police define more usefully who is on this list and who isn't. Because currently, nobody can quite answer how you get on the list or how you get off.
Well, one of the concerns, again, I don't want to speak about like she's not here, one of the concerns that Senator Arnold's raised with us is the issue of how you get on the list, how you get off the list, informal gang members, and this issue of green light and being taken off the list if you shouldn't be on there. One of the things that as a consequence of the ICO's findings, the Met Police have done is all informal gang lists have been deleted by boroughs. And that's really important, not just issues around data, but what happens as a consequence of being on a list is a big concern BAME Londoners have, and their parents and families and stuff. And that's really important as well. And that's one of the reasons why I welcome the Met Police being transparent in relation to the website, explaining what the gangs matrix is about, explaining processes by which one gets on there, how one gets off there and stuff, but also they'll be publishing the various impact assessments, which will hopefully reassure those in relation to processes. But when you're even if a tool is invaluable, you've got to make sure proper processes are followed. And what we don't is inadvertent discrimination, either intentional or unintentional, caused by a list created as an operational tool.
We can both agree that the transparency is going to be a good thing for the police and for the public. But can you commit by the end of your term to addressing this disproportionality? Because there's problems around justice, around the impact it has on young black Londoners and their communities who rightly, in my mind, we think we're unfairly put on this list. We're not aware of this list. Nobody tells us the impact of this list. There's no consistency. So what I'm asking you directly is, will you be able to do something to address that disproportionality before the end of your term?
I'll do everything I can as mayor, and I have done for the last 2 years to address the issues of disproportionality and discrimination in our city, including those who come in contact with the police. I just remind colleagues that I was 11 years old when the Brixton riots happened up the road from where I live. Issues of disproportionality were then in police in the so-called sus laws, which led to the Police and Criminal Evidence Act of 1984. I remember giving evidence as a lawyer to the Macpherson inquiry in 2001, issues of disproportionality there as well. And there are still issues of disproportionality now when you come to the figures in relation to stop and search. And we've all read the Lammy review as well. I think it's unrealistic for even me to end disproportionality by the end of term one. But that doesn't mean...
I'm clipped for time. I don't mean disproportionality everywhere. I just talk about on the gang matrix. That's all I'm talking about, because this is something that you as the police commissioner, in a sense, have great control over. No, I'm not talking about the rest of what goes on for the Met, just that one piece.
Well, again, I think there are two separate issues, and I thought that the Assembly member recognises, he clearly doesn't. One is disproportionality, two is whether it's justified or not. Okay? And so we need to look at, is there disproportionality? I think there is. What are the explanations for this? How do we address them? Because what's really important is we realise that when I meet young Londoners with the victims of life crime and their families, too many of them are black, Asian, minority ethnic Londoners. We know we've got an issue in relation to confidence of some of our communities with the police, those in positions of power and influence, but every police officer will tell you he or she's job is made much easier by members of the public having confidence with them. That's why this issue affects everyone, and I'll do what I can to make sure we have less disproportionality. Where there is, it's properly explained, and we try and minimise disproportionality. But our population, our young population, is quite diverse. There's a disproportionate number of them who are the victims of violent crime. We've got to take action to reduce that.
Thank you for that, Mr. Mayor. I just want to end there, Chair. Thank you.
Assembly Member Berry.
Thank you. Yes, so I wanted to ask a bit more about data protection law. The Information Commissioner's enforcement notice has some very, very stark conclusions on the issues on which she can rule, which are data protection and privacy. She says that basic data protection practice has not been followed, and she comments on how the potential harm to people from this poor practice threatens public confidence in effective law enforcement. Now, we know you've said you've been reviewing the purpose and use of the matrix yourself for some time. And you've MOPAC tell us that the review has started officially in July 2017. So can I ask when you first became aware that the gangs matrix was likely to be breaching data protection law in such wide-ranging and serious ways?
I can't, the problem is you get so much information, I can't actually give you a specific date when I knew. But I had concerns from before I was the mayor, as Senator Arnold has said. Before I was the mayor, people were telling me from Jeanette, David Lammy, many others, concerns around this operational tool. In relation to individual breaches and processes and stuff, I mean, I couldn't tell you when I knew about that, but I was, even though I knew what I knew, MOPAC were working closely with the ICO, and so, including when the ICO published their enforcement notice, so MOPAC would have known during the course of the work being undertaken by the ICO of their concerns, and in fact, the ICO and actually Amnesty International were invited onto the reference group, as many other harsh critics were as well. So, MOPAC were concerned. We're talking to the Met Police about this, but in the meantime, working with others to make sure these concerns were addressed.
And I'm looking through the action plan, and it's good to hear you've ensured, for example, that the informal lists have been deleted, because that's incredibly serious in terms of data protection rules. But if you knew quite early on in your review, say a year and a half ago, that this was unlawful data retention, why didn't you stop it straight away or put in place much sooner the action plan the Met now have?
I think MOPAC have been doing that. So, for example, one of the things that were brought to the ICO's attention, or brought to their attention by the Met Police Service, the Newham case. And so it's an example of, because the ICO were part of the reference group and MOPAC were working with the ICO, some of these things were being action in real time. That doesn't mean the ICO shouldn't publish their enforcement notice. They should publish their enforcement notice. The Met Police should respond to the enforcement notice. But I think it'd be unfair to the MPS to suggest they simply carried on as they were without making changes. There were problems with some
I'm
of
not
the
feeling
issues.
the urgency from them, though. I mean, the correspondence, the information that's been put out by the Information Commissioner says that they tried to put off completion of the action plan for a whole year after November, when the enforcement notice was issued. The Information Commissioner wanted 3 months, and they've compromised on 6 to get all the steps completed. But it doesn't seem like the Met were taking this seriously. In fact, it seems to have been the complaints from Liberty that triggered this, rather than anything internal that comes from your review. Would you agree with that?
No, I don't think so. I met the Commissioner to discuss this, and the Deputy Commissioner, and they've not given the impression of not taking this seriously or lacking.
So why would they want an
urgency.
extra year if everything was in hand and ready to go?
I'm not sure about the extra year, but I mean the conversations I've had with and those that that they both understand the importance of public confidence, as Jeanette said. They both understand the reason why this is going to be sorted out sooner rather than later. And by the way, some of the things the Met Police are doing, or they've already announced, aside from our review, goes further than what the ICOs are asking in relation to the website and other steps that the Met Police Service are taking. And what should be reassuring to the Met Police Service is the ICO aren't saying this is not a useful operational tool. Some people, by the way, would say that this should be abolished altogether. There should be no operational tool for the Met Police.
If it's breaking the law, I mean, it should be.
So the Greens, for example, think there shouldn't be a gangs matrix, Chair. Now, I don't accept that the police shouldn't have this operational tool. I think the police should have this operational tool, but clearly it's got to be done lawfully.
So I just want
to
to ask...
be done in a way that doesn't breach laws and break processes, and that's why it's really important for the Met Police Service to take on board the concerns raised by the ICO and the enforcement notice.
So I just wanted to ask, finally, about governance and oversight in the future. I think the Information Commissioner was very concerned about the lack of this from the Met's leadership throughout the process. She says, there is no evidence that the MPS considered at any time the obvious privacy and data protection and equality impacts, whether by formal assessments or otherwise, until prompted to do this. And I think there's a really strong case for you to take a proactive oversight role in the ongoing maintenance of the gangs matrix from now on, so it isn't like cleaned up once and then allowed to slip again. You've mentioned your specialist reference group, I think, that you've had during the review. Is there a case for keeping them on to keep overseeing this in lots of detail in future, just to keep a very close eye on this?
Well, one of the things that the Met Police Service has done is to produce an action plan setting out how they're going to redress the serious concerns raised by the ICO. And so they're doing that piece of work, and the Deputy Mayor for Police and Crime has a role to play in oversight there. Separately, I'll be publishing the MOPAC review, the most authoritative review in relation to the gangs matrix, which will set out a number of recommendations for the MPS. And that will include the role of myself and Deputy Mayor Sophie Linden and others with the gangs matrix going forward.
Okay, thanks.
The next question has been withdrawn, which was the one on value for money. And we now go to Assembly Member Desai's question on working with the government to achieve a public health approach to violent crime.
Well, Chair, can I say how sorry I am that the question on value for money has been withdrawn by the Conservatives, but there you have it. The next question from Umesh Desai, Chair. I'm determined to tackle the problem of rising violent crime head-on. We've set up a new violent crime task force made up of almost 300 officers, which is dedicated to tackling violent crime in the worst affected communities. But we know that policing cannot solve this problem alone. And that's why, as well as tough enforcement by the police, we're also taking a public health approach, which is about treating violence like a disease, tackling the root causes, treating the symptoms, and preventing it from spreading. We know that the causes of the rise in violent crime are extremely complex and involve deep-seated problems. This includes poverty, inequality, social exclusion, mental health, and a lack of opportunities for our young people. And you're absolutely right that a public health approach is about working with partners across different areas. That's why, building on the publication of London's first knife crime strategy, in 2017, I'm now setting up London's Violence Reduction Unit. I'm pleased to say that the development of the VRU is progressing well, with community engagement right at the core. We've already convened experts and practitioners in the fields of public health, community safety, youth work, mental health, violence against women and girls, children's services, youth engagement and more to develop the model. Our approach is putting partnership right to the heart of the VRU, and we're working with local councils, the police, the NHS, schools, community representatives, faith groups and young Londoners, all the groups and organisations who have a stake in delivering a public health approach to tackle the long-term causes of violent crime.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. My question to you was, and you addressed it, and I welcome the work you're doing around the public health approach. That goes without saying. And we obviously require a buy-in from partners in all sectors. But also, as important, if not more, we require a buy-in from the public. Now, you talked about community engagement, youth engagement, faith engagement, I accept all that. But what I'm concerned about is, are we doing enough to sell this approach to the public at large? What does it mean for them, for the proverbial person and the class? Clearly, for family that's been affected, I can't tell them that the public health bus is around the corner. They want immediate action and enforcement action, which you are doing. I accept that. But
let me give you some examples of where we need the public's help. If you knew that your young brother or young sister, nephew or niece, somebody you care about, was being sexually groomed or being radicalised, you would take action. You would do something about it. Similarly, if somebody's been groomed into a criminal gang or is being told it's okay to carry a knife, there's something I think you should do about it. Not just for that young person and for your family, but for wider community as well. So there's a role for parents, big brothers, big sisters, uncle and aunties to stop people joining these criminal gangs. Prevention, stopping an infection occurring in the first place, is a really important part of that. Resilience, making sure young people have good role models, making sure they understand what is right, what is wrong, the difference between right and wrong is very important. The other thing is that the lack of information from the public when there are crimes is astonishing. And when the police tell me that they've got cases where there are clearly eyewitnesses, clearly people see what happened and aren't cooperating, that's a problem. So all of us have a role to play to help keep our city safe.
I agree with Mr. Mayor. It's just about selling the campaign in in 2019. Because I'm limited of time, can I just come straight to my second question about education? The school's Ofsted inspector, Ms. Spellman, I believe that's her name, Amanda Spellman, she was quoted in the press this week saying that schools can't be substitute parents, which of course I agree with. They can't solve the problem about knife crime on their own. But we do need a buy-in from the education sector. How can you convince the government to ensure safeguarding and tackling violence runs throughout education policy? And very specifically, I want to ask you about the Ofsted's observation on the role of head teachers. This is what they had to say, that the head teachers who refuse to acknowledge that knife crime affects their school, they worry that by taking action and talking about knife crime, they'll be admitting their school had an issue. This is immensely distressing and shows that these schools have lost sight of their job in building children's resilience and teaching them how to stay safe. I've had personal experience of schools in East London that sometimes do actually take this attitude as well.
And I've met with the Chief Inspector and she was very impressive. She understood the issues we're dealing with. She understood schools have a role to play, but by themselves can't be doing this issue. By the way, nor can the police. I also met with the Secretary of State, Damien Hines, and impressed upon him the importance of education. And he also accepted it, and I was very impressed by his understanding of these issues. But you're right, there are some schools who don't want a school support officer, don't want somebody coming into an assembly because they're worried their school being labelled. And that's why what's really encouraging is at the summit we held with people from across London, there is now an acceptance. All of us have a role to play in grappling with this issue. Every school is affected. The academisation of schools hasn't helped because, forget City Hall, local councils have less control now in relation to what happens in the schools. We're trying to bring together schools, pupil referral units, academies, those non-academy schools, to work together, and the thematic review Ofsted are working on may help in relation to the safeguarding role of schools. Making children safer from violent crime is one part of safeguarding, in my view.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Assembly Member Whittle.
Mayor, I'm just carrying on from my colleague's question. With the public health approach to violent crime, knife crime in particular, apparently, as I understand it, from the examples of Scotland, which are often quoted, stop and search was integral still to it, isn't that right?
Correct, yeah. So that's the infection. How do you deal with the infection? And the way you deal with the infection is enforcement. Targeted stop and search. You make arrests, you charge people, you make sure justice is done. How do you stop the infection spreading? You make sure, for example, on one night, if there's gangs involved, get high police out in that estate, stop it spreading, if it is an estate or a street, stop it spreading, deal with the criminal gangs. But also stop the infection occurring in the first place. Education, youth clubs, role models, that's all very important. But you're absolutely right. People forget that's part of this public health approach, good enforcement.
Yeah, apparently when stop and search was sort of lessened, the approach also started to fail slightly. Indeed, when it was enforced, as it should have been, then it was much more effective. So it was central to it. There's a very good piece I might draw your attention to by a former deputy mayor here called Munera Mirza, who wrote Spectator all about this very point. We can't get away from this central thing, I think. It's without being, obviously you've got to be nuanced, I understand that. But given that, do you yourself personally regret saying during your campaign that you do everything you could to stop and search?
Not at all. Let me tell you where Munira is wrong. She forgets the other part of the equation. What about investment in public services? What about youth centres? What about wraparound clubs? What about parenting classes? What about Sure Start? All those have been cut hugely over the last 8 years. So for a conclusion to be drawn that the sole reason for the increase in violent crime is because of a reduction in stop and search doesn't bear scrutiny. But also, the Home Office themselves, the Conservative Home Office, did research which showed there was no link in relation to the industrial scale stop and search and knife crime going down. A number of factors were given for knife crime going down. It wasn't due to that. What I'm in favour of, and I've said this throughout my adult life, is targeted, intelligence-led stop and search. That means police officers having the intelligence to stop and search somebody based upon information from the community, information from other members of a gang, other information they may have, another stabbing that night. Not random, indiscriminate, industrial scale stop and search. And let me tell you why it's important. It affects all of us. If I stop and search you today, treat you discourteously, you've got no reason to be stopped and searched, you're unhappy with the way you've been treated, why would I expect you tomorrow to come forward and report a crime, be a witness, provide intelligence? And that's why this affects all of us having a stop and search system that has the confidence of the police to use, but also the public as the recipients. That's why the body-worn videos is a big game changer when it comes to stop and search in London.
I do accept that. No, Assembly Member Whittle, I'm afraid you're out of time, and I'm afraid you're
not
out
even
of
for a happy
time for
Christmas.
your table question as well.
Oh, okay.
So we go on to the next question, which is in the name of... Oh, I'm sorry. Who should I be calling? Assemblymember McCartney, Statutory Deputy Mayor. Forgive me.
Thank you. Mr Mayor, can I thank you for the work you're doing to tackle violent crime, and the violent reduction unit I think is going to make really great headway. But residents in my constituency were really concerned recently because to tackle this you really need the buy-in from the local community. And the Met Police, I think, had released some information. They were proposing some armed patrols in residential areas, and understandably that's caused great concern. Can I ask, did you have concerns about that? Because I believe there'd been inadequate consultation. And secondly, do you understand that such patrols may actually increase fear and distrust rather than provide reassurance if they are done incorrectly?
I would be concerned if armed patrols became routine and part and parcel of policing in London. That's not how we police. We never have, and I hope we never have to. We have seen in the last few years an increased amount of armed response units and armed response vehicles. That is very different from armed patrols. And we police by consent. Police officers are peace officers. They're there to keep the peace. And I don't want them carrying firearms routinely. If it was the case that the police were considering for operational reasons to increase the amount of police officers who are on our streets with a firearm other than the ARVs, ARUs, there'd have to be public consultation. Because it, in my view, changed the dynamic. And you've alluded to public confidence. But we know that actually your response to a police officer may be very different if he or she's armed than it would be if they're not armed, and that's why they need to be, if, and I say big if, this was being considered, we need to make sure we do it properly.
Thank you. Have you made that clear to the Commissioner?
Yeah, and to give the Commissioner her dues, I think as a consequence of a meeting at the Police and Crime Committee, and I think questions raised by Selimah Deval, you know, the Commissioner understands the public disquiet there would be. I think she was making a point, which is a different point, which is there have been examples, and it's really important to explain this, where there's been an incident, often tragically leading to a death, where the police turn up and armed response vehicle turns up, and members of the public may have seen officers around the scene with firearms. They may have gone a bit away from the vehicle, but they need to be near their vehicle because they could be called away elsewhere. And I think she was explaining that actually, as we've had more of the violent crime task force, there may have been an increased presence. Just to say this also, the police are joined up. So you don't just have the violent crime task force here, the ward police officer here, armed response vehicles there, Trident there, the dogs team there, the air team there. They do work together. And so Londoners will see when it comes to individual instances, you know, the police team working together, which may involve Londoners seeing officers with firearms.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. The question on TfL spending is withdrawn. So we go to the next question from Assembly Member Twycross on the bedroom tax.
The bedroom tax is a cruel policy that fails to understand the lives of tenants and should be scrapped. As a result of the bedroom tax, more than 36,000 social housing tenants in London have seen their housing benefit cut. I voted against the policy as an MP, and I've campaigned against it for many years. Not only is the bedroom tax a heartless policy, it's not even effective by the government's own standard. There's little evidence of people moving to smaller homes because of the bedroom tax, and so it fails even to do what the government misguidedly hoped it would. That is doubtless because the ministers who introduced the bedroom tax failed to take account of the reality of people's lives. They didn't understand, or they chose to ignore, the importance of tenants' connections to their homes and local areas, how hard it can be to find a suitable smaller home, and how expensive it is to move. What we're seeing is tenants stomaching the bedroom tax, staying in their homes, but being forced to cut back their spending on food and other basic living costs, or borrowing from family or friends. Government ministers must not ignore this reality. They must scrap the bedroom tax and other welfare reforms that are hitting so many Londoners.
Thank you. I'm concerned that this is another example of a government policy that is failing around the welfare system, and that is penalising people who need support instead of actually trying to deal with the real issues. I recently spoke to a woman who tried to move out of her home proactively when her daughter left home. So she proactively offered to move out of a larger property, and there was no suitable accommodation, so she fell into arrears. She was then not eligible to move because of the arrears. So she ended up in a cycle of increasing despair when her housing association sent her to the council and they sent her back sort of repeatedly. She was in a cycle of actually sort of just being sent from pillar to post. She ended up with mental health issues and increased arrears. Her case has fortunately now been resolved, but it shouldn't take 18 months to address this. I just wondered if you could comment on what more can be done to prevent other people suffering similar issues.
As long as this policy is in place, there'll be more people like the person you referred to. Simple as that. There simply aren't the smaller homes for people to move into, and people don't want to lose the protection they have as a council tenant or as a tenant from a housing association. There are some schemes we've got in place. We've got a housing moves scheme, a seaside and country home scheme to try and help people move to a smaller size home. But they're not there. And so we know they're not there. We know people aren't moving. So the sole purpose of this policy is for punishing people like one you've mentioned. And so I can't give you good news, save for the fact to continue to lobby the government to scrap this. As I said, it's a cruel and it's a heartless policy.
Yeah, I know you've been raising issues around universal credit on an ongoing basis, and I just wondered whether it was time to just ask the government to review all the welfare changes that they'd introduced since they sort of came in 2010, because actually there's so many things that are falling through the gaps, And my concern is that because we're rightly concerned with universal credit at the moment, issues like the bedroom tax sort of fall by the wayside a bit.
Okay, can I say, this is one consequence of this government being in paralysis because of Brexit.
Yeah.
We've actually got a Secretary of State for the Department of Work and Pensions, who I think is very good. I've written to her. She's not responded yet, but I've written to her. When I say she's very good, I think she would understand the concerns you're raising and try to address them. But she's spending all her time having to bat for the Prime Minister on Brexit. Yeah. And rather than her being distracted by being the Prime Minister's advocate and defender, I'd rather she focused on some of these policies that are causing huge misery to not just Londoners, but people across the course of this country. What I'm happy to do, Chair, is once I receive a response from the Secretary of State, depending on what she says, to consider whether there should be, I'll ask for a meeting, whether we should to discuss some of the consequences of some of the welfare benefits policies.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next question is from Assembly Member Copley and relates to homelessness.
Thank you, Chair. The level of homelessness in the capital should shock us all. It is our moral duty to do all that we can to help. And the government should be ashamed as they're responsible for some of the causes of rough sleeping. This year, we're using an extra £3.3 million secured from the government to double the size of our street outreach team and to introduce new floating hubs. We've also opened a new staging post which offers rough sleepers in-depth support to stay off the streets, which I've witnessed firsthand. These services operate all year round, but there's a particular urgency to help during winter. When I came to office, severe weather shelters only opened when 3 consecutive nights of freezing temperatures were forecast. This was unacceptable. Since then, we changed the policy to open shelters when temperatures of 0 or below were forecast for any single night. This winter, we've gone further. First, City Hall is coordinating a new protocol to open councils' emergency shelters London-wide if it is forecast to be freezing anywhere in the capital. Second, all councils have adopted my in for good principle, which means once someone is in emergency shelter, they can stay regardless of the temperature until a plan is in place to help end their rough sleeping. We know Londoners want to play their part, and last month we launched the Winter Rough Sleeping campaign. This builds on the success of last winter, when Londoners donated over £200,000 to our homelessness charities coalition and made over 8,500 referrals to StreetLink. This year, I'm asking Londoners for help again. And now they can also donate through our new TAP London contactless donation points throughout the capital, including here at City Hall. Since the launch of the campaign this year, Londoners have donated over £118,000 and made over 2,500 referrals to StreetLink. But whilst we're doing everything we can, the government must put far greater investment into tackling homelessness and need to focus honestly on root causes.
Thank you for that answer, Mr. Mayor. And it is shocking and shameful, really, that in one of the richest countries and richest cities in the world, so many people are still sleeping rough on the streets. And in fact, the Office for National Statistics has published figures today which estimate that 136 people who were sleeping rough died in London last year, which is 22% of the national total, which is a very sobering figure. I wonder if you could tell me, the cold weather shelters were opened in London wide for the first time last week. Do you have any indication yet of how many people used them?
I do have that. I do have that. So over 1,250 spaces were made available through the emergency shelters last week. The bad news is the overflow provision run by City Hall has had to be used. That's when capacity has been reached. We received 33 referrals from at least 13 councils where local capacity was full. And we're going to carry on working with councils. By the way, the faith communities are remarkable, and community groups as well. And so we'll work with all these groups, Tom, to make sure over the course of this time we try and make sure we get people who need help the help that they need.
Thank you. And of course, the work of the No Second Night Out team is fantastic and incredibly important. And the chain reports show that much of the fall in rough sleeping in 2017 to 18 was due to a greater proportion of people spending only one night sleeping rough. But there is still a sizable proportion of people who've been sleeping rough on more than one occasion and over several years. What proposals are you putting forward to address long-term entrenched rough sleeping, and what support are you getting from the government?
Well, one of the things that should give us some source of optimism is last year we noticed over 80%, I think it's 83%, of the people that we helped in our emergency shelters no longer went back on the streets. And so that shows where there is proper support given, you can help those who are sleeping rough. And you'll be aware from your other work, these are people with complex mental health issues, often addiction abuse, and other complex needs that need an expert assistance. The bad news, though, is there are more people who fill those places who come on as well. So there's lots of work we're doing, including one of the things we're looking into is whether we can have mental health assessment done on the streets and help given, alcohol and drug addiction support given as well. But the key thing we've got to do is deal with the root causes. And so the point I made in answer to the question from Fiona was actually, what are the root causes of people being homeless? So no first night sleeping night is very important. The work James Murray is doing with council to stop somebody getting on the streets in the first place. But welfare benefits changes is a big factor. Large number of the LGBT plus community are affected. Again, cutting resources for those groups that help LGBT plus communities is a problem. So if we can deal with the root causes, we can stop the pipeline of people becoming rough sleepers in the first place.
Okay, thank you very much.
Assembly Member Sahota on loneliness.
Thank you, Chair. We know that sadly too many Londoners feel lonely. That's why a key part of our social integration strategy is focused on building stronger relationships between Londoners from all backgrounds, seeking to tackle the root causes of social isolation. Earlier this year, Matthew Ryder, my former Deputy Mayor for Social Integration, brought together key stakeholders at a dedicated event on social isolation earlier to have their input for the delivery of this strategy. The new Deputy Mayor for Social Integration, Debbie Weeks-Bernard, sees social isolation as a core part of her brief and fundamental to creating a more integrated city, and is determined to carry on this work. And in fact, Chair, you'll know because you were there, the Bishop of London, Sarah Mullally, in her address at the Carol service this week also talked about loneliness and isolation as well. Through our social integration strategy, we've invested £600,000 through the London Family Fund into projects that help to bring a diverse range of families together and reduce parental isolation. And we've committed £3 million through the London Together Fund within Sports Unites programmes to invest in initiatives that bring Londoners together through sport. The Equality, Diversity and Inclusion Strategy will address some of the needs of older Londoners, but over this Christmas period, our peer outreach team have been working closely with organisations like the Tote Project to combat loneliness for young care leavers and to host events so they're not alone on Christmas Day as well.
Well, Mr. Mayor, thank you very much for the answer. May I wish you a Merry Christmas. Of course, Christmas is a time of joy and happiness for many of us, but for some it's a time of sadness and loneliness. Age UK tell me that 198,000 people in London haven't spoken to another person for a whole month. The new Economic Foundation have said that 1 million young workers in this country are lonely. So given this time of festivity for most of us, what can Londoners do to help their neighbours and those other people lonely in the coming weeks?
Well, Chair, we should sound patronising. What a lovely question at this time of year. I mean, it is a big problem. And it's deeply upsetting in a city like ours. Somebody can go an entire month without speaking to a human being. And I think all of us, just think what we can do as human beings. If you know in your street there's somebody who's older, knocking on the door, offering a Christmas gift, just saying hello. If you've got children who are quite conversational, encourage them to do the same. Many of us are lucky to have pets, and when we're out and about walking our pets, we will say hello to other dog owners. There's many things that you can do, and you can signpost people to events. Across the road from me is a lovely church. Every Christmas has a Christmas lunch for people who otherwise would be lonely and having Christmas lunch by themselves. And so I know there are campaigns. Age UK have a great campaign. But I think all of us, I myself going to take away from your question what more I can do as an individual to try and speak to somebody who otherwise may not speak to somebody. But I think all of us can do that, really.
Yes, I know that a Good Morning Britain this morning was running a campaign of where you can pledge minutes, and I would just want to give that a bit of airing that the people of London can do that. But also, the impact of loneliness, right, is much more than obesity. and is as bad as smoking 15 cigarettes a day. So how will your social prescribing policy help us address the loneliness in London?
Yeah, good question. So I chaired this week the most recent London Health Board meeting, and one of the GPs who sits on the Health Board was talking about what you were saying, about actually the cost of loneliness, to put aside the other consequences to the NHS, is huge. And some of these issues can be dealt with by social prescribing. And he's an expert in Tower Hamlets in the east of London, which has quite advanced social prescribing models. There's got to be a maturity in relation to where you send people to. There's no point having a social prescribing model where you send somebody to a facility that doesn't exist. And so we're trying to map out, that could include funding, by the way, some schemes that will be places where people can go to. Can our health centres do more in relation to them being places people can go to do aqua exercise, swimming, other activities that gets them to meet people? We're also seeing how we can use technology, particularly for young people. One of the things that the Bishop of London said during her address was the numbers of young people who are lonely is huge. Other apps we can use in relation to, giving young people they can meet. Sport has a role to play, but everyone likes sports, and so we've changed the definition of what we mean by sports to include activities that aren't necessarily team sports and stuff. But it's a live issue, and I'm hoping that over the course of the next year, the health inequalities plan we have bears fruit in relation to more social prescribing. And by the way, human interaction is far better in the medium to long term, forget the short term, than giving somebody a tablet. And so it's really important we address this issue.
Good. Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and all the leadership you're giving in this area. Thank you.
Thanks, Walker.
Assembly Member Bailey on small businesses.
Thank you, Chair. Small businesses represent over 99% of London's businesses.
It's withdrawn. Oh dear. Right. And then we have a change in the running order. The question on workers' safety goes to the end, and it's being replaced by Assembly Member Shah, which is the last question on your paper on step-free access.
Thank you, Chair. As part of making London's transport system one of the best in the world, we must ensure it's accessible for all Londoners. It is simply not right for people with disabilities, parents with young children, and many older people, for many of our stations, to still be difficult to use. I promise that we need to do more. We need to be more ambitious with our approach to step-free access, and I'm committed to delivering that promise. Since I became Mayor, a total of 8 stations have become step-free: Vauxhall, Tower Hill, Tottenham Court Road, Bond Street, Bromley by Bow, Buckhurst Hill, Victoria and Newbury Park. There are now 76 step-free tube stations on the network, representing 28% of all London Underground stations. By March 2020, a further 13 tube stations should be accessible, and 6 more stations, Boston Manor, Ruislip, North Ealing, Snaresbrook, Park Royal and Rickmansworth, which I announced in January 2018, will be delivered by spring 2024, making 34% of the tube network step-free. Finsbury Park and South Woodford will be the next stations to become fully accessible. We're also delivering accessibility at other tube stations as part of other programmes, including Crossrail and the Northern Line extension stations. I've also been active in promoting accessibility elsewhere on the Network Rail network. Step-free access was provided earlier this year to the overground platforms at Black Horse Road. Works are currently underway at West Hampstead and White Hart Lane overground stations. TfL recently recommended that 21 national rail stations receive access for all funding from the DfT to provide step-free access at these stations during the period from 2019 to 2024, further extending the step-free network. All London buses, apart from heritage route masters, and more than 95% of bus stops across London are fully accessible. All 22,000 of London's taxis are fitted with wheelchair ramps, and TfL is working to enhance access at taxi ranks. TfL is using innovative, cost-effective ways to make the network more accessible.
You have outlined a list of stations which are benefiting from your program of step-free access for London Underground. Would you have a list of those 21 stations which you have recommended to government for step-free access?
Yes, sure, with mining colleagues. So the government for a number of years, including when I was a minister, have had a scheme, Access for All scheme, and it's DFT funded. And so there are 21 in London. I've got the list here, which I'm happy to read out. It won't take long, Chair. Mill Hill Broadway, Hackney Downs, Dalston Kingsland, New Barnet, Gunnersbury, Kentish Town, Enfield Chase, Rains Park, New Southgate, Wandsworth Town, Kentish Town West, Harlesden, Queenstown Road, Battersea, Bruce Grove, Kew Bridge, Leighton Midland Road, Bowes Park, Catford, St James's Street, Brentwood, that's platform 4, and Wood Grange Park.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Should there be any problem in government funding not forthcoming, any chance that you would be able to fund any of these stations given the priority and consideration that you have made?
Our focus has got to be TfL stations, for reasons you'll appreciate. You'll know from personal experience the difference having step-free makes to local people being able to use that form of public transport. So I think it's not realistic for the TfL to pay for DFT-run stations to be funded. But we'll carry on lobbying the government to ensure those who made a bid for receive the funding for them and access for all for them to be step-free. Because if you're a commuter, you don't think about, is that TfL, is that DFT, is that somebody else? You just want to use public transport. That's why we will talk with DFT to make sure we're successful.
Any chance that you might have another tranche of your 200 step-free project being extended as another package as priority for step-free access in the tube itself?
In the business plan we've published, no additional ones, but there is a comprehensive spending review next year. And there are many members of the government, senior members, who say there'll be a massive windfall if and when we leave the European Union. And I'm looking forward to the billions and billions of pounds that will come into our coffers. And so some of those billions and billions of pounds, I'm sure, can be used for TfL funding. And some of that money we'll use for step-free access, I'm sure.
Very interesting. Look forward to that as well. Thank you. Mr. Mayor.
Thank you.
Indeed, yeah.
Will you please, members, agree to suspend standing orders in order to allow the remaining business on the agenda to be completed? Yep. Thank you very much. The next question is from Assembly Member Dismore and is about high streets.
Thank you, Chair. High streets contribute massively to life in London. They're much more than just places to shop. They're at the heart of our communities. The festive season is one of the most important times of year for our high streets. At the beginning of December, I met with the Director of Small Business Saturday, a national day celebrating small businesses around the UK, and was happy to lend my full support to the campaign. We know the enormous pressures that our high streets are facing, not just at Christmas, but throughout the year. Business rates, the increase of online shopping and high rents are creating a perfect storm of extremely difficult trading conditions. Add to this the uncertainty created by Brexit, and it's no wonder shops are closing on our high streets. However, high streets have time and again demonstrated themselves to be flexible, adaptable and robust. Since becoming Mayor, I've campaigned for changes to the government's unfair business rates policy. This includes calling for devolution of business rates to London Government. We've also invested tens of millions of pounds in regenerating London's high streets and town centres. The draft London plan takes a strong town centres first approach, and last October my team published High Streets for All research which showed the economic, social and environmental value of high streets and makes the case for supporting our high streets. As part of the Good Growth Fund, £70 million were invested in programmes across our city, including in high streets, and there are various other initiatives we're taking to make sure businesses, town centres and others are thriving going forward.
Well, thank you for that answer. The Black Friday saw a 3.2% downturn in shoppers' footfall, the lowest since the 2008 recession, and this seems to be continuing to the Christmas period, including at big stores like John Lewis, Tesco and Sainsbury's. John Lewis has seen sales fall by 5%. Big companies have also gone into administration or closed stores, including House of Fraser, M&S, Toys R Us, New Look, Mothercare, Debenhams, and restaurant chains like Jamie's, Italian, Prezzo, Carluccio's and Byron Burgers. And much of this is due to the fall in people's disposable income and a loss of consumer confidence, worsening as a result of Brexit. So what action can you take to help our high streets?
You raise a really important point in relation to consequences on to our high streets and shops going forward. These are jobs that have been lost. These are taxes that otherwise would have been paid by individuals and companies that are being lost. A number of measures that we're taking from City Hall, from the support we're giving in the Growth Fund, really important, and we've seen some crowdfunding examples there. Planning has a role to play in relation to protecting uses, really important going forward. We engage regularly with stakeholders in this area. Lobbying the government in relation to business rates is important. Can they change the threshold requirements so that those businesses that have to pay the business rates now wouldn't have to pay so if the threshold was amended? One of the things we're doing also is to try and publicise good retail. So London and Partners is looking at what we can do around the country, promoting London's shops and retail sector to other parts of the country. So when people from other parts of the country come to London, one of the reasons they come is because of our retail.
Well, thanks for that. As you say, high streets are struggling due to increased rent and business rate costs and competition with online retailers, who it seems may also be in trouble in light of ASOS's profit warning, which has seen their shares drop by 40%. Yeah. So what else can be done to help small businesses with their overheads, especially rent and rents?
Well, I think all of us can do our bit by using small businesses and small shops, really important going forward. Business rates is a big concern. Rent is a great concern. Small businesses, lack of people using small shops because of internet shopping. I asked the question rhetorically, how many of us bought our Christmas presents via the internet rather than going to our local shops? So that's why things like Small Business Saturday is so important, the first Saturday in December. It focuses our mind on what could be lost unless we shop in our local high streets. Nobody wants boarded up shops or pawnbrokers, and other shops that are not attractive to be in our high streets. That's why it's really important we support our high streets. We will carry on doing so from City Hall, working with the 32 boroughs, but also working with business improvement districts, chambers of commerce, local chambers of commerce and others to support businesses, small businesses across London.
Thank you.
Assembly Member Gavron, permitted development rights.
Thank you, Chair. The government's latest proposals to introduce more PD rights won't deliver good growth for London's high streets or the homes Londoners need. Permitted development has resulted in the loss of over 676,000 square metres of office space in London since 2013, valuable space that provided jobs and supported London's town centres. In some cases, it's led to the development of substandard housing and has not contributed to the supply of genuinely affordable homes. The government now proposes to allow commercial buildings to be demolished and their sites redeveloped without the need for proper planning application. This seems a totally unworkable proposal, and I'll be responding to the consultation in robust terms. The government also proposes changes that would allow shops to convert to restaurants, cafes, estate agents or offices without needing permission. This dismantling of the planning system will cause further harm to our high streets at a time when they need more support, as Assemblymember Dismore has just raised. Some permitted development is useful to allow families to extend and alter their homes or businesses to operate flexibly, for example, but it seems that the government wants to allow anything, anywhere. I agree with the Rainsford review that the government should rethink their approach to permitted development.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, for that very, very comprehensive response, which I really agree with that. I just want to say these latest proposals from the government to extend permitted development are cynically called supporting the high street and delivering new homes. Now, put starkly, far from supporting the high street, what this means, these new proposals, so-called reforms, is that local shops on which communities do depend, if you want sustainable neighbourhoods, you've got to have local shops, which they depend, can overnight, as you were saying, without going through the planning system, be changed into estate agents, other uses, restaurants, and even worse in a way, they can be demolished. They can be demolished and rebuilt into, and all the evidence shows, substandard flats without any amenities and not one affordable home. Now, the question is, what will this do to the character, the identity, and crucially, the use of our high streets? And how does this square with your vision of regenerating local neighbourhood high streets and town centres in outer London?
Well, I think you raised so many important points. And by the way, let me give you one other benefit of a thriving high street. Dr. Sahota referred to isolation and loneliness. How many of us, go into a local shop and have a conversation with a shopkeeper, our neighbours there? That's been lost as well in relation to the high street struggling in recent years. The government's policies seem to be inconsistent with devolution. They're taking powers away from locally elected councillors and the planning structures in place by local councils. But also what they're doing is accelerating our town centres' demise. And that should worry us all. And I think this is a one-way ticket as well. Just like as a consequence of recent policies, we saw office blocks change to substandard housing. My worry is we're going to see currently thriving shops close down to substandard housing or other uses. And it's really important to understand the consequences of the government's policies. And that's why I'll be responding robustly to the government's plan. It doesn't seem to me their plans are consistent with supporting our town centres.
I'm really pleased to hear that, because I absolutely agree with you. This is deregulating the high street. It could really, I don't want to overemphasise it, but I think it could really kill off our high streets. And you said you're responding robustly to consultation. What conversations are you having with government? And are you thinking perhaps of coordinating local authorities, especially outer London local authorities, to lobby government?
Well, firstly, I will take up your suggestion and speak to London councils and particularly the outer London boroughs to work together in relation to responding to the government. We've used our planning laws to protect, for example, culture using planning laws and change of use. And my worry is if you're now a landowner, you've got somebody who wants to pay X pounds rent for a shop, but you've got somebody else who wants to pay X times 20 to turn that into a residential home. What will you as the landowner do? And we'll lose that shop forever. So I'll take your idea, work with some councils to see if we can do a joint submission or work in partnership with them in relation to the government's plans.
I think in addition to that, actually, looking at your policies in the London plan, it completely undermines them. And Nick Rainsford has said that this is a fiscal giveaway to the private property sector. I would call it cut-price capitalism.
Yeah, we all agree with you, Nicky, but time is up.
What's the matter? Are we out of time?
Yes, please. Thank you. We all agree with the Mayor on this one. Right, I think. And the final question...
What are you doing? Didn't give him a chance to reply.
No, because you're out of time.
That's a different thing.
The final question, we now go back to Assembly Member Prince's question on worker safety.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I do support measures to increase workers' safety. Everybody should be guaranteed to be safe and secure in their workplace. Just they should be guaranteed to receive a fair day's pay for a fair day's work. This is one of the reasons why I'm so proud to call myself a trade unionist. Trade unions have been at the forefront of securing improvements to workplace safety for more than a century. Just as they've helped to secure annual leave entitlements, lift restrictions on parental leave, and tackle discrimination in the workplace. I'm pushing to make workplaces safer by creating a new Good Work standard to highlight and promote the very best employment standards across London. The Good Work standard will ensure that employers are fulfilling their legal obligations regarding duty of care and are taking reasonable action to protect their workers from anything that may cause them harm. Employers will be required to consult with their workforce to ensure the right protections and policies are in place. The Good Work standard will recommend a range of actions employers can take to further improve worker safety, such as putting in place specific safety precautions for nighttime workers and setting up health and safety committees for workers. My Healthy Workplace Charter programme includes a specific section on health and safety. Organisations are required to provide evidence of compliance with health and safety law, risk assessments, monitoring for hazards and mental health training. We're also taking other direct action to ensure worker safety. This includes reviewing the equipment for firefighters following the Grenfell Tower tragedy, ensuring the Met Police has all the equipment they need to keep officers safe, supporting the police in the use of spit hoods when necessary in custody suites, rolling out the use of body-worn video, something that's both good for police officers and the public, and we've reviewed the impact of the previous Mayor's ticket office closures. At all of the GLA functional bodies, we're ensuring that worker safety always comes first. For example, TfL's vision for safety is everyone's home safe and healthy every day. This is focused on engaging the workforce and supply chain supply chain, working with them to improve near-miss reporting, to prevent accidents before they happen, and involving them to look for ways to improve safety. Every single injury or death in the workplace is a tragedy, and I'd welcome any suggestions from Assembly members for what more we can do to make workplaces across London safer.
Thank you, Mr Mayor, and I think everybody in the Chamber would welcome that, and I think that's very commendable. But I would like to make a suggestion to you, Mayor, in relation to London taxi drivers. You may be aware that Steve McNamara recently issued advice to his members that they should avoid Lisson Grove Estate because of the troubles there and the fact that even the police are having trouble policing that area. I don't know if you're aware of the issues at Lisson Grove, Mr Mayor? Oh, right. Taxi drivers are being attacked at Lisson Grove. If they take a fare there or they travel through Lisson Grove, their cars are being damaged, windows are being smashed, fireworks are being fired at them, and the police are struggling to look after them. I accept you don't know what's going on, and I'm not criticising you for that. Could I ask you, Mr Mayor, to look into it then, please?
Chair, absolutely. It's not acceptable for anybody to not go about their business because they're worried about their safety. So can I look at that and get back to it?
Perhaps we could have a conversation offline on that.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Mr Mayor. That's great. Thank you.
Assembly Member Hall.
Thank you, Chairman. Mayor, you mentioned spit hoods in the custody suites. As you know, it's absolutely shameful that spitting and biting is against officers on the streets all the time. We're now in the most ridiculous situation that the City of London officers have spit hoods on our streets, as do the BTP. There's a review supposed to be going on. I was told on the 1st of November that the review was going on. Can you tell me if we're any further towards having our officers protected as they should be on the streets of London?
Well, can I thank you for raising this issue? I know you're concerned about the welfare of our police officers, and you're aware of the consequences officers of being spat at, being bitten, but also the spread of some diseases as well. The Commissioner of Police is in dialogue with the Police Federation. You'll be aware that her paramount concern is to keep her officers in our city safe. I've not received an update in relation to the work taking place. You'll recall officers are encouraged to report every incident, and so as soon as I've received news on this from the Commissioner, I'd be more than happy, Chair, to write to the Assembly Member Hall to let her know, bear in mind her interest in this issue, what developments there have been.
Thank you. If you would push it, because it is ridiculous that the City of London police have them and BTP have them. So what happens if they're all on the streets with somebody biting and spitting, and our Metropolitan Police officers will have to rely on the hope that a BTP officer is around or a City of London officer may come and assist. It's a ridiculous situation, and I'm very grateful if you would push on it, please, because we did a whole thing in the Assembly, and other than 3 members, we were all absolutely for these spit hoods being used by our police officers to keep them safe. Thank you, Mr Mayor, and happy Christmas.
Thank you. Right, well, thank you, Mr Mayor. That's the end of the question time for the calendar year 2018. Notwithstanding what you've heard around the table today, can we wish you and yours comfort and joy?
Very kind. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much.
Thank you,
Merry Christmas.
Will the Assembly please agree the motion which is set out on the agenda in my name, which is that the Assembly notes the answers to the questions asked? Thank you very much. Can I ask the Assembly to agree to accept written questions to all under MQT procedure? Have I read this out in the wrong order?
Written answers to all questions submitted to the 25th of February 2019 Mayor's Question Time meeting under the MPT procedure, Chairman.
Okay, thank you very much for reading that to me, so that we can devote time to discussion of the Mayor's draft consolidated budget 2019-20. Can I ask the Assembly to agree to use the 7th of February 2019 London Assembly plenary meeting to hold a question and answer session with the Mayor of London and the Commissioner of TfL regarding the policies and work for Transport for London?
Agreed.
Thank you very much. The date of the next meeting will be Mayor's Question Time, which will take place at 10 a.m. on Thursday, the 17th of January 2019 in the Chamber. There's no other business, but we've been quite Dickensian today. So in the words of Tiny Tim, can I say, God bless us, everyone. Thank you very much.
Well done. Well done.
GLA Chamber South.